The first bill for our public hearing this morning is HB 1163, and this is relative to overvoted ballots, and with us is the prime sponsor, Representative Porter. Welcome, Representative Porter. Representative Porter has another committee to get to, so we thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marjorie Porter. I represent Hillsborough District 1, the towns of Antrim, Windsor, and historic Hillsborough, which is celebrating its 250th anniversary this year. I come before you this morning to introduce HB 1163 relative to overvoted ballots. I brought before you a similar bill last year on which you did not look favorably, but it died on the table. And since then, we've had the audit of the 2020 Wyndham election results to show how important the provisions of this bill are to fair elections. If the provisions of these bills had been in place in 2020, what happened in Wyndham, where shadows created by the folds in the ballots caused the machines to count them as overvotes, would not have been possible. I'm hoping you will look more favorably on the bill this year. And I have some visual aids here because I am a teacher, so I think of these things. An overvote happens when more than one allowable number of votes have been made for an office or a ballot question. So if you can see this, this voter has filled in both ovals. Neither Santa or Oscar the Grouch gets a vote for this, okay? When a voter fills in her ballot like this, in communities with vote counting machines and in communities where hand counting occurs, this voter's choice will not be counted, obviously. But let me show you some other ways that ballots can be marked. And see if you can tell me if you can determine the voter's intent with that ballot. I thought this was stiffer paper. Okay. Santa, no. Oscar, yes. Here's another version. 2 filled in ovals, 1 X'd out, initialed, and the one that they want is circled. This has happened. Here's another one. Stray marks are on the second oval, but it's clear when you look at this who won that vote. And finally, this ballot was folded, and there's a shadow coming through the oval. But it's obvious who the voter voted for. Currently, voters with these types of marked ballots in towns where hand counting occurs will have their votes counted because the voter's intent is clear. But under our current system, voters in towns where machines count the votes would lose their vote because the machines record as overvotes all these kinds of marked ballots. This creates 2 classes of voters. The good news is our machines can be programmed to reject overvoted ballots, returning them to the voter, much like that change machine returns the crinkled dollar bill to you at the laundromat. This is exactly what happens in Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and many, many other states, maybe 49 of them, because Section 301 of the HAVA Act of 2005 requires the voter be notified of the overvote, be informed of the consequences, and be given an opportunity to correct it, including completing a new ballot if need be. In fact, when we were researching how other states handle overvotes, we often were met with the surprise, you don't do that in New Hampshire? It's the law. I have given you a document describing how other states handle overvotes. HB 1193, as original, outlines a process we would like to see happen in New Hampshire. But we have heard concerns both from committee members in this committee and from the Secretary of State's office about parts of it. And so we have also drafted an amendment which we believe addresses those concerns. And I believe that the amendment would be accepted or be acceptable to the Secretary of State's office. I've given you copies of the amendment. In both versions, Election Day voter privacy is protected, as only the voter looks at or handles the ballot. In the amendment, Election Day voters and absentee voters are treated in the same manner, with no opportunity to fix errors, and with the overvoted ballots from both placed in an auxiliary compartment to be counted at the end of the day. There are others behind me who will offer more reasons to vote in favor of this bill or the amendment, either in its original form or as amended. What I want to leave you with is this. In the 2020 election, in the town of Derry, the machines were programmed to record the number of overvotes. Overall, 4.7% of ballots were counted as overvotes. One machine was used solely to count absentee ballots, no other ballots. On that machine, 14.2% of the ballots counted, 570 of them had overvotes. 570 people who voted absentee lost their votes, leading me to believe the shadow issue found in Wyndham may have been more widespread than we know. We have very close elections in New Hampshire. They can be won or lost by a few votes, so every vote should count. I hope you will support us in this effort, and I'll be glad to take questions that you may have. Seriously?
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. You just cited absentee ballots.
Yes.
In Derry. However, I just don't see the procedure for how we would notify an absentee voter that their ballot had an overvote in the same way that we would be able to notify someone in person.
Right.
Because by the time we realize it's an overvote, we no longer know who that ballot is from.
And that's why we amended that language out in the amendment.
So the scenario you mentioned wouldn't be affected.
If the amended bill passes, all those absentee ballots will go into an auxiliary to be counted, and the in-person voter will have their ballot returned, and the election official will say, please put it in this auxiliary bin to be counted later, be hand counted later. So both kinds of ballots will be hand counted at the end of the day in the same way, and the election day voter will not be given the opportunity to correct it. We think that weakens it somewhat, but if making these changes will allow this process to proceed in New Hampshire, as it does in all the other states, I think we're willing to compromise on that issue.
Appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. So my question is, this is just regarding electronic ballot counting devices and not hand-counted towns. Why aren't we extending this to hand-counting towns? So why are we letting electronic ballot counting towns have this opportunity, but hand-counting towns not?
Because in hand-counting towns, the intent of the voter is clear when they're counting the votes. The problem comes that the machine miscounts this as an overvote. But if this ballot came into a hand-counting town, the ballot counters would know Santa won this vote. It wouldn't be Oscar.
Okay, follow-up,
Okay,
Madam
yeah.
Chair. Thank you. So what if the voter had an overvote in a hand-counting town, and that ballot obviously was not like spit back out at them, but it would be given that opportunity to correct it in like a machine counting town?
I don't believe they would, in a hand-counted town, it would be noticed right away
Right,
because
'cause they're
people would put
counting
their
it.
ballot in the machine, okay? The only time it would be noticed in a hand-counting town is when they're actually counting the ballots at the end of the day. What happens, the machines can be programmed to count overvotes and to return overvoted ballots. And by the way, there's no extra charge for doing that. It's already done. The company that does our machines does this for other states. So the problem comes when the voter goes into a machine counted town with an overvoted ballot now, the machine just takes it. But if this bill passed, that machine would spit it back out, and then it would go in an auxiliary to be counted. So, okay.
Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. If a voter actually overvotes, not an accidental mark or a fold or any of that, but
Yeah.
it's an actual overvote.
Yeah.
If the original version of the bill then would require that ballot to be passed back to the voter to be corrected, is that correct?
To give the voter the opportunity to correct it. And if you look at the sheet that I gave you with email messages about how other states handle this, it talks about what their voter manuals tell the election officials to do when an overvoted ballot is spit out. Okay.
And follow-up question?
Follow-up.
Then, following up on Representative Alexander's question, in the case of the original version of the bill,
Yeah.
a machine-counted town, a voter who actually overvoted
Yeah.
would be given an opportunity to correct, but a
Yes.
voter in a hand-counted town would not be given an opportunity to correct.
And that's why we amended the bill.
So in that case,
So we
the
would-
amended version is better than the original
Be-
version.
in a sense, because both sets are treated in the same way. Okay, the amended version still doesn't put us in compliance with the federal law, but it does allow overvoted ballots to be looked at by a set of eyes and a decision made by the set of eyes rather than the machine.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Representative Porter, for coming. Would that be a privacy concern for the hand-counted towns to have a set of eyes on that when the voter is there, because members of the town would know how the person voted?
No, because in a hand-counted town, the person takes their ballot and puts it in the ballot box. No one looks at their ballot until the end of the day, and then all the ballots are looked at and counted. So you're not going to know, if you're next to me, how I voted, because I'm taking my ballot and putting it in a hand-counting ballot box. That's what happens in a hand-counted town. But in a machine town, the voter puts the ballot into the machine. No one looks at it. And the machine would spit it back out to the voter. No one looks at it. And then the voter would put it in the box, no one looking at it until the end of the day.
Representative Barry.
Well, this is what you get when you say nobody asked me questions, just FYI.
I'm actually glad that you're asking the questions because it's not an easy thing to get your head around.
Okay, I have two questions, Madam Chair, but I will ask for my follow-up. So just to understand, the amendment, because I don't support the underlying bill because it creates two classes of voters, but the amendment removes that problem.
Yes.
Now I'm speaking to the amendment.
Yes.
So a person with an overcasted ballot in a machine count town puts the ballot in and it spits it back out.
Yes.
And then the person standing there takes that ballot and puts it in a box, or
No.
goes to the diverter?
No, the machine can be programmed to say overvoted ballot. So the person puts it in, it spits back out, the election worker looks at the machine and says to the voter, you have an overvote on that ballot. Please put it in the auxiliary box to be hand counted later. So nobody but the voter handles that ballot
All right,
until the end of the day when the ballots are all counted.
Follow-up.
So this, that's better than what I was envisioning, but it's still, underlying problem is still there. So now the voter's been told they have an overvoted ballot. Isn't that, but they don't have the opportunity to correct it.
No.
Isn't that going to create I would say dispute with the,
Well,
with the election worker?
It might. That's why the language was in the original bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's problematic language to many people, so it's been eliminated. The rules that the Secretary of State sets up for processing these kinds of things can say, just tell the voter that there's the machine doesn't like your ballot, put it in the other box to have it counted. So if that could be done, and that's a way to get around fisticuffs at the election site.
Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Porter, were you aware that state law currently allows a voter to get a new ballot up to 3 times?
Yes, I am aware of that. I don't think voters are aware of that. And that was one of the reasons why, in the original bill, we brought up the fact that the voter could be told that he could get another ballot if need be. But that created problems for the Secretary of State's office and for many of these committee members here. So it was, but yeah, there's an education process that goes on that should be going on. And maybe, I don't know, notification on town websites and things like that might help people to know that. But I
Maybe
don't
we
think-
can put another sign up. If you've been one of the election worker who does those posters, it's hard to imagine, but we could do another one.
you,
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you. I have kids, and I sometimes have to make crazy signs around my house
Yeah.
to remind them to do things that
Yeah.
I think that should be self-explanatory.
Yeah.
And you can imagine.
I'm a teacher.
Yeah, so you've been there.
Yeah, yeah.
Aren't the ballots posted with the amount of openings in a field? So it would say vote for 3 when there are 3
Yes.
openings, but there may be 5 candidates.
Yep.
Isn't that at the top of every
It is.
list?
It is.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that all the voters read all the directions carefully. Okay, and you know what comes in as a confusing, in my district in Hillsborough, we are currently represented in 2 House districts, a flotarial and a base district. And we can vote for 2 candidates in each one of those districts. And when you look at that ballot, if you're not familiar with that, it's very confusing, because it says state representative, vote for no more than 2, and then below it says state representative, vote for no more than 2. So here you got 4. Am I supposed to vote for 4? Am I supposed to only vote for 2? So people who are not familiar with how things work, and there are a lot of people like that, often don't vote for the right number of people because it's confusing.
Representative Muirhead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you say that as things are now, in the absence of this bill being passed, that there are 2 classes of voters with respect to overvoted ballots?
I would say so, because the voters in the hand-counted towns get their votes counted, at least looked at by a pair of eyes. But voters in machine-counted towns do not. So voters in machine-counted town could lose their vote, and those people being voted for could lose that vote as well. I mean, 570 overvoted ballots in the town of Derry, that's a lot of votes. You know, that's a lot of votes to lose in just one machine.
Representative Lane. Oh, I thought you did. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning, Representative Porter.
Thank you. Good morning.
My question is, do we know if the ballot machines will be able to make this determination immediately, or if it'll take several seconds to evaluate the situation with the ballot?
It does it right away, just like when you put that dollar bill in. Something's wrong, it spits it back out. The machines are programmed to do the same thing. So you put the ballot in, it might accept it, and the minute it sees an overvote, it comes back out. And there's no charge to anybody for programming the machines that way. We've checked.
Follow up.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up, obviously, we want to expedite the voting process
Right.
as smoothly as possible, especially in a heavy turnout election, and that
Right,
would be
right.
a concern potentially. Thank you.
And I believe the ballot machines spit out ballots for other reasons besides overvotes. I think I've seen people's ballots come out and they have to feed them in a couple of times
Right.
because there's a glitch. Okay, so it's not unusual.
Representative Freitas.
Red, press. It is supposed to be red. Yes, that's right.
Have I forgotten my question? My question is this: if the machine is going to spit it back out,
Right.
why do I not have the opportunity at that time to say, or the person who's next to the machine say to me, doesn't like your ballot, perhaps you should take it a right player, and then my vote would be corrected and put in. We can have 3 ballots.
Yes,
It
and
seems to me I would get my vote more accurately, and maybe I could get a little education as well
and
as to what my problem was.
exactly, Representative, and that's why the original bill was written the way it was. The problem is some people consider that creating 2 classes of voters because voters in hand-counted towns would not have that opportunity. Nobody would know it was an overvoted ballot until the time of counting at the end of the day. So those voters would not have a chance to fix it.
Thank you, I understand.
Okay?
Thank you. Representative Quayle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Representative, for taking my question. Over here.
Nice to see you.
As a selectman, I had the opportunity to observe the mechanical functioning of a voting machine for many hours.
Yeah.
And it was not uncommon, in our town at least, for a voter's ballot to be rejected upon the first attempt to submit it.
Right.
And it might take 2, even 3 tries, I suppose, depending on initial alignment or whatever.
Right.
Is there, in your understanding, a way for the election worker to distinguish between a ballot that's been rejected for an overvote and a ballot that's just simply been rejected because of that kind of momentary difficulty?
Yes, my understanding is the ballot counting machines can be programmed so that when an overvote is detected, it says so right on the screen at the top of the machine. So the election worker could look at the machine and it would, after the ballot came out, and it would say overvoted ballot.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope that I see the Derry Town Clerk here, and I'm not sure he's going to speak on this, but for that reason, I'm going to ask you, and if you don't have the answer, that's okay. Are you aware of the interesting, special, unusual dynamics that happened in the Derry election? Because we as candidates did anticipate that there would be many overvotes prior to the election.
I am not familiar with the details prior to the election.
I actually am not even going to, that question is, you need to rephrase that before you re-ask that question of anybody, because I'm not going to allow that. That was way too leading or whatever.
Okay. Anybody else for Representative Porter?
That gives you time to rethink it. All right, thank you very much, Representative Porter.
Thank you, committee members, and have
All
a
right.
good day. I'm going to go down and fight battles in education now, so thank you.
See, this wasn't a battle, though, so there you go. All right. Next signed up to speak on this is Alvin C.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here in support of this bill to require the ballot counting machines to be programmed to return overvoted ballots. I find that the important part of this bill is actually in the sentence, the last sentence of Part 1, which starts on line 10 in the middle. It says ballots of absentee voters and those who choose to correct or replace the ballot, choose not to correct or replace the ballot, shall be placed in the auxiliary compartment and counted. I see by this requirement that every ballot that has has an overvote will be segregated out and put into the auxiliary compartment, and therefore every machine shall report 0 overvotes. It doesn't fix problems with undervotes, but it does eliminate overvotes on the machines. And I see this as being actually the most important part of the bill. And I agree with the suggested amendment that would change it so that the in-person voter doesn't have the opportunity to correct a ballot. But this is actually more important than the few in-person voters who may overvote or have stray marks on their ballot, because it eliminates the overvote potential from the machines themselves. And I even think it's we have to consider that it's more important than whether or not we have 2 classes of voters or even 4 classes, because we have voters in towns that don't have to deal with machines and know that their votes are going to be looked at by hand counting. As well as we have absentee voters who get to vote from the comfort of their living room or dining room or whatever, and don't have to drive anywhere in the rain or snow or whatever to go vote. So with that, I urge that ought to pass on this bill. I did want to make one other comment on this. That last sentence in part 1, I see that as a possibility. That first phrase says ballots of absentee voters and those, and continues. It almost suggests that every absentee ballot has to be hand counted. So that sentence might be rephrased to say, and this is in my written testimony that you have, and also what I sent online. Ballots of absentee voters returned for an overvote, and ballots of those who choose not to correct or replace the overvoted ballot shall be placed in the auxiliary compartment and hand counted by election officials. That may need to be changed slightly if you adopt the amendment proposed by Representative Porter. And I thank you, and I will answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Mr. C? Seeing none, thank you very much. And I do have your written testimony for the record here, and it has been submitted electronically also. Also signed up for 1163 is Ken Eyring.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. This is a very important bill. In my mind, I live in the town of Windham, and I'm sure you all know the issues that took place during the election that were discovered after the audit of the 2020 general election. And this, I believe, will address many of the issues that were discovered. But before I begin, I'd just like to suggest that this election integrity bill, and it is for election integrity, it's a nonpartisan issue, and that can be reflected in the fact that you have sponsors from both parties that have signed on to this bill, and I'm grateful to all of those reps and for doing so. I want to point out a couple of things that are related not just to Windham, but to other towns as well. During the general election in 2020, you heard that Derry had 4.7% of their ballots had overvotes on them. Merrimack, one of their machines tabulated a massive number of 396 overvotes on 1,738 ballots. That's a 22.78% percentage of ballots that had overvotes on it. And I am hard to believe that nearly 23 out of 100 people who put their ballots into that one machine actually made that type of mistake. On another machine in Merrimack, there was only 14 overvotes out of 1,856 ballots for a 0.75, so less than 1% of the ballots. So from 23% of the ballots in one machine, less than 1% in another machine. The statistics don't make sense. Manchester had a machine that had 14.99% and another machine that had 2.37%. Windham had 292 overvotes on one machine and 18 on another. So 8.9% versus 1.3%. Hampton had the same type of situation, 9.51% on one machine, 1.65% on another. And those anomalies can be seen across the state. I've actually looked at the paper tapes of all the towns across the state. And this is not just isolated to Windham. It's an important issue because, as you heard in previous testimony, the machines can misread the ballots. As you've also seen in the forensic auditor's report, the machines did actually misread ballots when they were put through the machines. And when that happens and it triggers an overvote, the voters' votes for that race are disenfranchised. And it's not hundreds, it's thousands across the state. It's many, many thousands across the state cumulatively. And that's really not acceptable if we want to make sure that our elections are accurate. And this is a very, very, very simple solution to this problem. There were some questions. I appreciate all the questions that you asked, and I appreciate the answers that Rep. Porter gave in response to those. You know, it's my understanding, with talking with the Secretary of State, that that when the ballots go in and they get rejected, they get read as an overvote, it come out. You know, in my conversations with him, and in my experiences in the Windham, voting in Windham, when the ballot doesn't get taken, you're instructed, go ahead, try it again. And you're right, it does take 2 or 3 times sometimes. But after that, in my conversations with Secretary Scanlon, you know, if it rejects it 2 or 3 times, then the election official can instruct the voter to take the ballot and put it in the auxiliary compartment. Nobody's going to see that ballot but the voter. And in this process, the election official doesn't even need to lean over and look at the machine, right? Because it's not really changing anything. The only thing that changes if it rejects it 2 or 3 times is now there's an alternative. Let's put it in the auxiliary compartment. And the benefit of that is that these machines are not going to falsely tabulate overvotes and then disenfranchise the voters. And again, as we see in the Windham election, that's exactly what happened. So machines do make mistakes. This is not a theory. It's been proven that that actually happens. There was also concerns about having 2 classes of voters. Well, I would suggest to you today that we already have 2 classes of voters. That in the towns that hand count ballots, those votes, the intention of the voter, are actually being counted. And with the machines, as you saw with some of these examples, ballots could have, you know, in the case of a race for either a single, you know, wherever there's more ovals filled in than are allowed, someone might exit off and then initial it. I actually saw that multiple times when I participated in the hand recount for the Windham general election for the state rep race. And that was an education experience for me because I could see that, yes, there are times where the ballots actually would be read as an overvote because of the way that the voter filled in the ballot. But in the recount, the intent was clearly known, and it was put off to the Secretary of State's office to decide that. On election night, it's the election officials who will decide that. And I think that that is also part of election integrity because you want the intent of the voter to be honored at the end of the day. So I believe that with the process that's outlined in the amendment, if the ballot gets rejected, they get instructed to put it into the auxiliary bin. There are no 2 classes of ballots anymore. The Secretary of State, they put together an election procedure manual. They could clearly define what the election official should say to the voters if their ballots get rejected multiple times. They don't have to tell them you have an overvoted ballot. They could just say, please, it's the machine's not taking it. Please put it in the overvoted, in the auxiliary compartment. And everybody's ballots are treated the same then, in the sense that if there are, red overvotes by a machine, that will be eliminated now going forward. And again, it's thousands and thousands of votes. And as you heard in previous testimony, a lot of these races in New Hampshire are decided by just a handful of votes. And if I remember from a previous bill that Senator Gaida wrote, 44 out of the last 45 elections were decided by one vote or they were tied. So it's really critical that if machines are going to continue to be used, that we try to eliminate all of the potential errors that might come up when we're using them. And I think that I've covered most of what I wanted to do, what I wanted to say. So I just thank you for your time, and please, this is a very important bill to pass. Please vote ought to pass. It is nonpartisan. It is election integrity. And after the last 2 years, there's quite a few people who are concerned about trusting our elections right now, and this would go quite a ways to doing so.
Thank you, Mr. Eyring. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Eyring? I'm not seeing any. Thank you for coming
Thank
this
you.
morning. Also signed up to speak on this bill is Mary Till. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Mary Till. I'm a former town moderator in Derry. And ever since I served on this very election law committee in the legislature, I've made it my goal to ensure that everyone who is eligible to vote has the opportunity to vote and to know that their vote has been accurately counted. HB 1163 is one small step toward that goal. Part of the problem of being cleanup is that most everybody has already said what I was about to say, so I'm going to cut my testimony very short, basically saying that I agree with everything that's been said already. I also want to point out that what 1163 does is ensure that the intent of the voter is considered when counting votes. The New Hampshire Supreme Court made it clear in 2003 that intent of the voter is the legal standard in New Hampshire. That's 2003. In hand count towns, the intent of the voter is noted and honored. In machine count towns, the machine discounts votes as an overvote, denying all candidates a vote in that particular race on that ballot. This is most egregious in multi-seat races, like many New Hampshire House seats. 1163 requires a simple programming change to return an overvoted ballot directly to the in-person voter to be placed in the side pocket. It's free because, as was stated, LHS has written this program for our neighboring states who have been using it for years. So I'm basically going to say, please pass this legislation so hundreds of thousands or thousands of New Hampshire voters will not be discarded, votes will not be discarded in upcoming elections. Let every vote be counted. It's time. And I support the amendment that's been proposed at the request of the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Ms. Till. Does anybody have any questions? Representative Quayle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. It's my understanding that ballots with a write-in vote are automatically segregated into an auxiliary compartment by the machine. If the same kind of action were taken automatically by the machine for a ballot that it detected an overvote on, would there be how to put this, an onerous burden of separating out the the ballots with write-in votes from those that are judged to have overvotes, so that both could be hand counted at the end of the day?
Excuse me.
So,
So it would not be onerous really to separate them because you can see a handwritten
Okay.
person. But the fact is it wouldn't even happen because one cannot tell by quickly scanning a ballot that there's an overvote on it. We don't know why that ballot ended up in that pocket. That's why we're asking the voter to put it in a third pocket that's called the auxiliary pocket, where the entire ballot is recounted. In the write-in pocket, we only have to recount the write-ins.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming. Also signed up to speak on this bill is David Scanlon, Secretary of State. And Representative Terosian, if you could get me the clipboard at some point, that would be great. This is the last speaker I have signed up for this bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm David Scanlon, Secretary of State, and would be in opposition to the original bill, HB 1163, consistent with past testimony. And I won't repeat that testimony because you've heard it many times in the past. But I will say that, that the amendment that has been submitted by Representative Porter, amendment number 757H, is something that the Secretary of State's office could get behind. It does not create an additional class of voter, but
Hold on, Deputy Scanlon. Could you give me that amendment number again?
the amendment number that I'm looking at is 757H.
Well, then I think we have a problem because that's not the amendment we're looking at.
741H?
Yeah. I'm just going to allow a little change in committee process here. Mr. Eyring, do you know what the issue is here?
I do, and there was two versions of the amendment, working with Rep. Porter, and it's just one word that was different.
Do you know what amendment number we should have?
Well, whatever, she had two of them, whatever one she submitted is fine.
All right, you want to approach Deputy Scanlon very quickly because it looks like he has both amendments, and if you can point out the difference, please, just to him very quickly. He's got them both there. I'm going to allow that to happen since Representative Porter is not here. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Oh, fuck. Did this just come up? Yeah, I didn't. I'm. Because if it's one word, that should have taken a lot quicker. So we're not going to go talking about amendments we don't have, and we'll have to figure this out at exec session. So, Deputy Secretary Scanlon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendments are essentially the same. There is some minor wording that I'm going to take a closer look at, but it doesn't change the position that I would have relative to this amendment, where if a ballot was placed in the machine that contained an overvote, that ballot was rejected, returned to the voter to be placed in an auxiliary bin so that it could be hand counted later, is something that we would support. I think that had a system like that been in place in Windham, given the issue that they had with the folds on the ballot causing the machine to perceive an overvote when one did not exist, that issue would have been not completely taken care of, but it would not have been to the degree that that actually occurred. I will say, just to address some comments that were made earlier about the current state of the law and the fact that the federal HAVA statute does have a requirement in there where machines reject overvotes in states, that there is also an exemption in that same statute that applies to New Hampshire that says that those states that have paper-based systems that provide instructions to voters on how to properly mark their ballot is exempt from that requirement. And so that is the exemption that New Hampshire has used all of these years. I'm not aware of how many other states may take advantage of that same exemption, but we certainly do here in New Hampshire. In Section 2 of the bill, I would say that there's a requirement in here that for each contest or ballot question, the number of overvotes and undervotes be recorded. I think it's a fairly easy thing to record overvotes. It may not be as easy to do undervotes, especially in hand count towns. So, I would suggest for the time being that we drop and undervotes on line 16 of the original bill until we have an opportunity to think more about how appropriate that would be. And then I would like to just address Representative Quayle's question about, can write-in votes and overvote ballots be sent to the same bin under the AccuVote machine? I think that would be confusing because in the case of write-in votes, the ballot is counted except for the office or offices that contain the write-in votes. And then when they're counted by hand, it's just those offices that had the write-in votes that are counted. Whereas if there's an overvote, that's the reason for why a ballot was rejected, the entire ballot needs to be counted. And so I think for that reason alone, it would be best to keep those ballots separate to eliminate the confusion and the potential count errors that might occur as a result of that. With that, I would be happy to try and answer any questions.
Questions?
Madam Chair.
Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Scanlon, question on the term undervotes. I know that the reports of the AccuVote machines use the word blanks. Is that the same thing as undervotes?
I'm not completely sure. I know a blank would be if there was an office that simply had no votes on it. I'm not sure whether the machine would consider a blank a situation where it's vote for 4 and the voter only marked 3. I'd want to research that and get back to you.
Okay,
Representative Bergeron, you're referring to the tape at the end of the night
The
that
tape,
has the
yes.
blank number?
It says, it uses the
actually
word
says-
blanks.
says
Doesn't
blanks,
say
yeah,
undervotes. I'm just
correct.
wondering what that accomplishes.
Okay. Representative Barry.
Call me Representative Ross. So the machines have the diverter in there for the write-ins that put them into a separate spot. And your concern is that it counts everything but the write-in, and then the people at the end of the night have to count that. They just count that one candidate, right? Couldn't we reprogram the machines to, if there's a write-in, they don't count the ballot at all, they just put it in the diverter, and then at the end of the night, and we do the same thing for overvotes, right? It all goes into basically the ballots that go into the bin, the diverted bin, are just not that they're not counted, but somebody pull a weird clip on the internet, but they're not counted by the machine. They're counted entirely, every office, by hand at the end of the night. Couldn't we do that, and that would kind of have our cake and eat it too?
I'm sure that the software programming could occur that might accomplish that. I would have to see how involved that would be. It would require an additional approval of the Ballot Law Commission for any software changes that would be made that would allow the machine to do that. I would add, though, that some towns have actually removed the diverter, from the machine because of jamming issues that have occurred in the past, especially when there are many folds on the longer ballots. It was the diverter actually caused jams that was frustrating to some communities, and so the diverters have been removed, and then the moderator and the election officials would go through all of the ballots looking for write-in votes afterwards. So the shorter answer is that what you described could be done, but I think we ought to give some thought to how that would occur and just make sure we're as efficient as possible.
Further questions? I have a couple. In regards to the representative's question, is it fair to say that there are some ballots, particularly in local elections, that have races with no candidate and that they are only write-in candidates ultimately?
Yes.
Okay. So in that case, when you had a race that nobody had signed up before the deadline, but people were waging write-in campaigns, it means all of those ballots under that proposal would have to be counted in their entirety, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you talk about an auxiliary, I sort of felt like I should go follow up. Yes. When we're talking about a diverter, right now when it goes into the diverter, no one sees it, right? It's just going. Most people don't even know such a thing is occurring within the confines of the plastic bin underneath the tabulator. So when we're talking about an auxiliary bin, we're talking about the voter actually placing it in it, but I'm assuming we're talking about something more than a open paper box, right? I mean, do you envision the Secretary of State providing specific guidelines on what this auxiliary container should be? And given what's happened in the last election, really, really, really specific guidelines as to what the auxiliary box should be?
Yes, my understanding is that there is a third auxiliary bin actually in the box under the AccuVote machine. So in the past, if a ballot is not read by the machine, either the corner's ripped or
Right.
That ballot gets rejected, the moderator takes it and puts it in a side auxiliary slot in the
Right,
actual
but we're already
box.
using the auxiliary slots. How are we we need another one, right?
Well, I don't know that we would need another one because the ballot that the moderator is currently putting in that box needs to be counted in its entirety. And so the same would be true of an overvote ballot that's rejected going into the same compartment.
All right, then I have a further question in regards to Section 2, which you spoke to, nobody else had spoken to. I had circled for each election the number of overvoted ballots. So can the machines be programmed to not only say it's an overvoted ballot, but to count it? And here's my question. When I put let's say I've overvoted, and I believe the former secretary would say maybe I purposely overvoted, but when I put it in, it's going to reject it. I'm going to get told by the person watching the machines to just put it in again because sometimes it's just not at the right angle. It doesn't like it that moment. And maybe after 2 or 3 times, it's going to take it. At that point, the tabulator has now counted my ballot as a cast ballot. So when I put in my overvoted ballot and it's kicking it back out, how am I going to program that machine to count that ballot as distinguished from any other ballot? Because it's not counting it when it's going in and being rejected. Now it's doing the same thing. I could do 2 overvotes and have the next person put in a ballot that has 2 overvotes. And would the machine count that as 1 ballot or 2 ballots? And the reason I'm asking is because of the question of tie-outs and legitimacy, and I'm worried about an obvious mathematical problem that will just create issues in regards to the tabulation that's done after the polls close.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. It might be worth getting somebody from LHS Associates who actually does the programming to answer, how that machine might actually read the ballot that gets rejected. And my understanding is that if it's an overvote, if it's programmed to reject an overvote, that the machine's just not going to read that ballot if it gets spit back out. But if it goes through, it has probably recorded something.
which is how you get a blank tally. But so my question is, how do you get an accurate overvote tally? That's essentially the basis of my question. If the tabulator is never essentially turning on to tabulate, how does it count? Again, because you could have successive different overvoted ballots. Okay, so I'm going to need an answer to that question, I think, before, if anybody's listening and knows LHS and Representative Porter, who's actually here. Okay. With the committees, yeah, let's get through Deputy Scanlon. We have one more speaker, and then I'm going to let you follow up with it. Representative Torosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Deputy Speaker, or Secretary Scanlon, for taking the question. So I want to be sure I'm clear now on how this works with the diverter. So right now, the way it's used, if there's a ballot that has a write-in that goes into that diverter box, that's what goes in there?
Yes.
Does any other ballot go into that diverter box currently?
No, the diverter would be to separate ballots that have write-in votes on them.
Follow up.
So if we were to adopt this amendment, then, if I'm hearing correctly, then the overvoted ballots would then go in there? Or no, they'd still kick out and be not counted?
They would be kicked out, not counted, and then the ballot would be placed in a separate auxiliary box under the device, so that the entire ballot could be counted after the polls close.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern with this bill, the original version without the amendment, is Section 2 with the for each contest or ballot question, the number of overvotes and undervotes. I could conceivably see a reason specifically in a primary or another race where a voter might not want to vote for the total number of people they're allowed to vote for. You know, for instance, in Goffstown, maybe I just want to vote for Madam Chair and myself and leave the other 3 blank. So my question is, are you advocating to remove Section 2 entirely from the bill because it adds in the overvotes and undervotes, or how would you want that amended?
No, I would leave Section 2 in. I would just remove on line 16
Undervotes.
and undervotes.
Representative Bergeron.
No, I don't have any questions.
I saw. I'm trying to be alert to red lights because I'm missing hands. Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you for answering these questions. I found, yeah, I'm glad that you addressed the HAVA Act issues. Would this need to be approved by the Ballot Law Commission after, if it were voted in favor of? Because it would require some software changes? Is that?
The statute would trump the Ballot Law Commission. However, to the extent that software changes would be required, the Ballot Law Commission would have to approve that.
Further questions for Secretary Scanlon? I'm seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Porter, did you want to come up and clarify? Because I know you're in the middle of another committee meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your concern. There seems to be an issue with an amendment. The amendment that I presented is the amendment. The difference between the 2 amendments, the one that the Secretary of State just gave you and the one that I gave you, is that we had eliminated the words "election day" on line 7, and I decided I didn't want to do that. So the second amendment that is not the one we wanted. We wanted the one ending in 4-1.
The one the committee has.
The one that I handed out to the committee. The second issue about can the machines count overvotes and undervotes if they don't accept the ballot? And I'm not 100% sure on this, but I have seen the pages from the Secretary of State's office from the state of Vermont, who uses the same machines we do, and it's programmed by the same people, and they show for each election the number of overvotes and the number of undervotes. So it is possible to get a count of the overvotes without counting the ballots. because they use a process where the voter is given a chance to fix it or not. And they use the process that the original bill set up. So they were able to keep account of overvotes and undervotes.
Further questions for Representative Porter? Thank you. We'll let you go again.
Thank you.
Mr. Healy.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Daniel Healy. I'm the Derry Town Clerk, representing our Town Clerk Association. Last year, a similar bill, our association opposed it. We're changing our stance this year. We're in support of this bill after what took place in Wyndham. We recognize that it won't cure all of the issues with the folds and the various things that was found out. If you undervote and there's a fold, the machine, it's not going to kick out, there's no overvote. So it doesn't solve everything, but I think it's a step in the right direction to solve some of the issues that were discovered. To the issue that was just brought up, I believe if a ballot goes into a machine and the machine, it doesn't go fully through the machine, it's not going to count on the tally tape. So when it's put in the side auxiliary pocket, the moderator and their staff at the end of the night would take a tally of how many ballots they pulled out of the auxiliary pocket to get your totals for the ballots through. I don't believe, unless if it doesn't go through the machine, I don't think that it adds another ballot. I don't think it does another count for it.
Right, but you understand if I have two successive voters who have each overvoted,
Yeah.
then the machine, I'm gonna have to
Oh, okay,
contact
okay.
somebody from
I get what you're
LHS,
saying
because
now,
I don't
yes.
know how the machine would differentiate that unless it was counting the ballot to know that the votes on other races were different.
Okay. Yeah, I get
But
what you're
from what I
saying now.
understand, it doesn't count anything until it determines all of the races have either been overvoted or undervoted. I see Mary Till, maybe you can catch me at the break, Ms. Till, if you've got an answer to that. Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Healy, for taking my question. Do I understand correctly from what you're saying is that the machine would not count the overvotes? The overvote ballots would be counted manually at the end of the night?
So right now, the machine would take the ballot, and on our long report, it states the number of overvotes at the very bottom of the tape. Right now, it would take the ballot, and it would count it as a ballot cast. I believe if that was turned on and so it kicked the ballot out, I don't believe that it would then count it as a cast ballot if it's kicked back out to the voter. With that amendment, I do like the amendment, but I do have a concern. I mean, I don't want to be telling the voter, oh, just put it in the side pocket when we know it's an overvote and they're given the ballot back and we can see that it's an overvote, and I don't want to just say, oh, well, there's, put it in the side pocket because the machine's not counting it. So I do have a concern with that we're not really telling the voter all the information that we know that their ballot
Yeah,
was
but theoretically, you shouldn't have even looked at that ballot to know.
Well, we wouldn't be looking at the ballot. It would be the machine.
The machine.
The machine saying there's
The
an overvoted
LED
ballot.
display, which theoretically, frankly, should be. I've got an issue with how close people stand to that machine, anyways.
So
You're close enough to be reading that. You can see the ballot.
Well, typically the moderator would be behind the ballot box.
Right.
The whole,
So, well, okay, that's a discussion for another day. As to this bill and the amendment, because we are behind folks, Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. Would you have to tell the voter you have an overvote situation, but at that same time you're not able to tell them in what race there's an overvote situation? So would they want to look at the ballot with you? How do you preserve the voter privacy during this whole situation? That's my question.
I believe that was that's the issue with the original bill, is that then it's becoming less confidential. So the amendment that was presented would then, so you put the ballot in the auxiliary pocket, and the election workers would not be able to see that. I did want to mention something that I heard earlier with the Derry overvotes. we had a few residents come to us with that concern. We had one very popular undeclared voter, so we had 21 candidates for state rep, choose 10 in 3 columns. And I mean, there's no way for us to know this for sure, but our assumption is that a lot of people voted for 10 between either 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and they filled in that bubble for the one very popular undeclared voter. So I don't believe that Derry really had an issue, a huge issue with the overvotes in the election.
Further questions? Representative Quayle.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. You said your organization now favors this legislation as opposed to last year. Do you favor the bill as originally introduced? Do you favor it as amended, or both? Or can you explain to me any distinction you're making?
So I can't speak on the amendment for our association. I can only speak to the original bill that we're in favor of. We believe that there needs to be some type of change because of what happened in Wyndham. This would probably solve about 75% of that issue if the overvotes were turned on at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Healy.
Thank you.
That is our last speaker on HB 1163. There were people that signed up online. I've been told that there were 161 in support, 34 opposed, and 3 neutral. And we have one person who signed up on the blue sheet who did not, 2 people who signed up on the blue sheet who did not speak on this bill, and they were in favor. I'm going to close the public hearing on 1163. We do have executive session scheduled at 11 o'clock. We will be taking a 15-minute break between this public hearing and the commencement of executive session whenever this public hearing ends. I'm going to open the hearing on CACR 15. This is a bill that was previously heard with a non-germane amendment. You have been provided a non-germane amendment. It has been provided to you. It should be in front of you, and it is 0735H. And this is an amendment that establishes a voter must be a citizen of the United States and a citizen of New Hampshire who is domiciled and whose primary place of residence is in the state, and he or she may only vote in the place he or she is domiciled. Copies of this amendment were available at the Sergeant of Arms office and on the General Court website, and I have asked Representative Berry to introduce the amendment to get it on the floor so we can start the public hearing on this. Thank you, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As Madam Chairman said, I'm not a sponsor of this amendment, but I am introducing it. As we said, when we amended CACR 15 the first time, the point of this amendment is to begin to end the debate over who is voting in New Hampshire's elections. Is it residents? Is it domiciles? Is it citizens of the state? So this amendment attempts to address that. As I will be asking questions on the amendment itself, I will not be taking questions.
Any further discussion? Thank you, Representative Berry. We have a couple of people signed up on this amendment. Michael O'Brien has signed up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michael O'Brien, here on behalf of America Votes. I am a lobbyist at Party Strategies. Here, opposed to the bill. First, a couple of reasons, well, a few reasons really, but for one, on line 15, domiciled in line 15 says has primary residence, a term that I do not believe is defined within statute. So we're sort of putting words in the Constitution that have no meaning as to what they actually mean, which is certainly problematic. You already need to be a citizen of the United States to vote. Citizenship is one of the things that is asked for qualifications. So again, I'm not sure the additional wording is necessary there. Also, you all need to be a resident of the state to vote in New Hampshire, right? It's the whole purpose of 1264 a few years ago, which was hotly debated within these exact walls. Maybe there was a wall in between, but just about the exact walls, was to equate the definition of residency and domicile. And so again, I feel like we're searching for a solution to a problem here. And lastly, I think there's a lot of conversations in this room about making sure people have faith in our election systems and their processes, and I agree with that. But I do think also that every time that we bring in a bill that purports to solve a big problem with people voting who aren't residents and storming into our elections, we are pushing that narrative that people should be afraid of our elections. We all have seen the comments from the governor, from the previous Secretary of State, the current Secretary of State. Many of you around this committee have said that we should have faith in our elections, that we should have trust in our elections. If we were to push that message as opposed to this one that we're pushing through this bill, people would have faith in our elections. It is up to us and to you all as elected officials to let people know that they should have faith in the elections and to not create narratives that would suggest otherwise. So that is my testimony. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Questions? Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. O'Brien. You've mentioned HB 1264 that helped further define residency domicile issues. I would assume you're aware that that has been a hotly debated issue for many years, many decades, and that definition has changed many times.
I'm aware. I've been in this room for about 10 of them, so I understand. Yes, sir.
And follow up, Madam Chair. You're also aware that this is not a bill; it's a CACR.
I am aware it's a CACR. I don't think the CACR is necessary.
Okay, and
Follow up.
Follow up, please. Since we have seen this issue argued back and forth and changed back and forth and back and forth, would it not be appropriate to put in our Constitution what we mean by residency and domicile so that the legislature can stop dealing with it because
Well, again,
it's in the Constitution?
Primary residence is not defined, so it's an undefined term. So you're putting an undefined term in the Constitution, which I'm not sure helps anybody solve a problem. But residents are the folks voting in New Hampshire elections. If people, again, if we stopped saying otherwise, people would have faith in our elections. We have to stop purporting a narrative that is not true.
Representative Barry.
So I want to ask you a question about, you say residency is not defined, but
Sorry, Representative, primary residence is not defined.
But isn't primary in itself an adjective describing? Like, it's saying primary, the number one, that's literally a description.
So I might defer to Madam Chair here because she's a lawyer and I am not. But primary residence, I believe, could be a separate term with separate meaning, and I think we'd have to be very careful about that before we put it into the Constitution.
I will just interject that as an attorney, I could carry things to no end, and there is a practice attorneys are aware of when you ask questions that you provide the definition, and there was once joking that the definition of "the" is because you can define everything. So, Representative Barry.
And in your testimony, you talked about, once again, I'm going back to the definition of residency here, but we do have definitions of resident in statute, not in the Constitution, but in statute. And part of that is how long you've lived in the state. So my question is since this is dealing with residency and residence is defined in statute, how long does your organization believe you should have to live in the state of New Hampshire before you can vote here?
Sure. So I think the answer to that in my history with America Votes, both as an employee and now as someone who represents them here, the Constitution is very clear, both U.S. and New Hampshire. Once you move here, it becomes your home. You are allowed to vote here, right? So there are, if we started requiring...
Could you, before you proceed, could you please define home?
Sure. So now we're going to go into the definition of domicile, which I think is the place where you identify as your civic engagement, right? So it can be, I would have to go back, and I'm going to get into definitions and get myself in trouble, and I'd rather not do that as much as possible, though I seem to do that more with 4 kids than I used to. But to say this, that if we were to start putting, we've seen bills in the legislature before about 30 days before someone can, can cast a ballot here. You're going to start finding people exclusions, right? So I move out before of a state within 30 days of an elections. I get here, I can vote in federal elections, but I can't vote in state elections. So I've lost my voice in a state election. If New Hampshire is the place where you live, where you consider your home, I'll say that, where you have an address that you would go to over and over and over again, this is where you should vote. And I think that's what's happening.
Further questions, Representative Berry.
So I just want to follow up my previous question, because my previous question was, how long does your organization believe you should have to live in the state of New Hampshire before you can vote here? Effectively, you said no specific time, which means 0.
So if I move here on election day, and I have bought a house on November 7th, I don't actually know what day election day is this year. November 8th. Whatever, I knew it would be around there. I wasn't sure exactly the day, right? I guess the counterpoint to that would be, if I own it, I moved all my furniture in, I own this home, it's election day, should I not vote here? Do I not have the obligation to the state of New Hampshire where I am committing myself to be? Why are we telling people this is the place where you're moving to, this is the place where you're committing to, but we're not quite going to let you vote here yet? We have this idea, and I know what you're going at here, this idea of the person who stays in the motel for 5 minutes and goes back, is breaking the law. Let's be very clear about that. That is breaking the definition of domicile. It is breaking the definition of resident under 1264 and 235. That is not acceptable in New Hampshire practice. However, me moving into an apartment or a home on the day of election day, I'm super dry, so I apologize for the sound here, but is accepted practice and should be, because otherwise you're telling people who have committed to New Hampshire, you're saying, great, you've committed here, but you're going to have to wait 2 years before you can cast a ballot. And I would argue that that is problematic as well.
Further questions, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my questions. You had stated that we currently require someone to be a citizen of the United States in order to vote during your testimony, and I was wondering if you or your organization are aware, in Vermont, there are a few municipalities, and in New York City, they've recently opened up municipal elections to non-citizen voting. And would this would prohibit such a move by any municipality in the state of New Hampshire, would it not?
It's, I believe, already printed in New Hampshire, which is where we're talking about the law is written. So,
but I'm just saying this would enshrine it in the state's constitution.
it would, but it's not. I do not believe necessary. Still.
Thank you.
Further questions, Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. If going back to the primary residence issue, if you take primary at face value, it's the main place that you live. Would you agree that for somebody to vote in New Hampshire, that should be descriptive of their right to vote, that it is their primary residence?
And I think it already is, yes.
You think that's already follow up, Madam Chair?
Follow up.
You think that's already in statute in New Hampshire?
I think that for folks who are voting in New Hampshire, it is their primary residence, whatever that I suppose means in statute.
Okay.
But in colloquial terms, yes.
Further questions? Representative Sweeney.
Thank you. Thank you again for indulging us.
Mhm.
So what I've gathered from your testimony and the answers to the questions is there's nothing technically new in this constitutional amendment that differs from existing state statute, in your opinion.
Well, again, it depends, I guess, what the definition of primary residence is. We're adding, I'm not sure, citizen of the state of New Hampshire, what that's going to mean for voters who show up. Are we going to have to, I don't really know what else we'd have to prove besides how you become a citizen of the state of New Hampshire. Is that just my lease or is that some other document? Unclear to me on what that means. But I think I'm objecting to also to the principle here, which is to say that these kind of things seem to suggest that there is a problem with New Hampshire elections, and I vehemently disagree with that. I'll also say that after the Senate passed this exact same language, I got more than one fundraising email talking about how great it was that they were passing this. So I think there are, I think we got to focus on issues that should be focused on.
Follow up, Madam Chair?
Follow up.
Thank you. Thank you again. I just think if
Question.
yes, my question is if our elections are great in New Hampshire, which I believe they are, should we not enshrine what current state statute has for our elections in our Constitution so they can remain great for the foreseeable future?
I would say they are going to remain great for the foreseeable future. There is nothing that has been presented to me to suggest otherwise, right? We are doing it well. In fact, I would say that the elections that we ran during the pandemic through the hard work of our local election officials were some of the most successful elections that we had seen. And so again, it's this idea that there is something wrong with our elections, that we need to do something to fix them when we do not. And perpetrating that idea is wrong.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Go get a
Been a
drink
long
of
time
water.
since I've got to do that.
All right, also signed up to speak on this is Liz Tentarelli. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Horgan, do you want to go? Sorry. I missed you.
That's okay, Madam Chair.
You
I'm
had
actually,
left, I didn't realize you came back in.
I'm actually glad. Former Mr. O'Brien, who's a distinguished former member of our caucus of the speaker's staff, was able to speak first because you asked a lot of tough questions, and I'm not sure whether my intellect is a match for especially for the two members in the corner, but I'll do my best, and I will explain why I think this amendment is a bad idea. So first of all, I'll just say parenthetically, the underlying bill or resolution, whatever you want to call it, is a good idea, but but I didn't show up for that hearing, so that's not what we're talking about today. So as Mr. O'Brien aptly pointed out, the proposed non-germane amendment is identical to Senate Bill CACR 36, which will go to the floor actually tomorrow, Thursday, February 24th, with a 3-2 ought to pass recommendation, and I'm pretty sure that was a party line vote, which leads to my... Yeah.
While it's only a rule in the chamber and
Yeah.
not necessarily in
Okay,
our chamber,
yeah.
I try not to talk about the other body.
Okay, I just want to say it's unnecessary. It's in another body. This proposal is already, going through the legislative process, and it will, if it gets through the other body, we're not allowed to mention, it will eventually be here, presumably be referred to your committee, the exact wording, right down to the commas and periods and everything. So it's exactly the same as another resolution in another body, and so I kind of feel like just bringing it up here. So it's first of all, it's just a waste of time and effort. We may already have our chance at doing it. So my second objection is that's a bad idea. Essentially adds the phrase "and his primary residency" to existing constitutional language, which states that voters must be domiciled in the town, ward, or unincorporated place where they vote. And I'm, like Mr. O'Brien, I'm really not sure what that phrase "primary residency" means. And it's also unclear to me, even if primary residency means something, I'm not sure why a person who's domiciled in a particular place in New Hampshire should be disqualified from voting simply because his or her residency is not, quote unquote, primary, whatever that adjective is construed to mean. So it definitely seems to me that there would be some cases where individual could now be totally disqualified from voting anywhere at all. If you're domiciled in one place, but you have your primary residence somewhere else, and I'm assuming the term primary residence actually means something other than domicile, but you would theoretically be disqualified from voting in either place, unless, of course, as I said, the term primary residence construed to have no meaning at all other than the place where you're domiciled, in which case this whole amendment is unnecessary. And I'm also concerned about student voting. In my written testimony, I talked about what a member actually of this body said to the other body, and I guess that's kind of it's not allowed here, so I respect that. But it definitely, I think it's perceived by me, and I think my perception is accurate, that it's, at least in part, would prevent so-called out-of-state college students from voting in New Hampshire. And I think there was, but the U.S. Constitution, federal voting rights law, and just plain simple common sense all stipulate that college students must be allowed to vote in the place where they actually live 9 to 12 months out of the year. And On the end of those, I said before, it's unclear what meaning can or will be ascribed to the highly ambiguous phrase domiciled in and has primary residence in the town, ward, or incorporated place. It seems to me that the so-called in-state students, which is actually most of the, I believe that's the majority of most of the students attending colleges here in New Hampshire. UNH, I know it's about 50-50. The community college system is like 95%. 95% in-state students, and Dartmouth has a significant percentage of New Hampshire residents, and I'm not sure about the others, but I'm fairly safe to say that a majority of the college students at the colleges, the University of New Hampshire, are in fact were living in New Hampshire before they moved somewhere to go to school. So it seems to me they would be deemed ineligible to vote in the place they lived before going to college, because either that place they lived before, supposedly, if you think it's still their primary residence, and I really think that's probably like why the sponsors in the other body introduced this, and there's things possibly they wouldn't be able to vote in either place. And you can't count on the out-of-state students actually being allowed to vote in the previous state that they lived in, and they, in many cases, have good reasons to want to vote here in New Hampshire rather than their old state that they've left behind. And also, something else to say about college students is they often stay for many, many years after they graduate. One of the members of the Stratford County 6th delegation, and I think I forgot to say at the beginning that I represent Timothy Horrigan, although you all knew that. I'm from Stratford County 6th, the towns of Durham and Madbury. But at least one of the state reps from my delegation moved here from another state in the 1970s, has lived in Durham continuously since then. So they don't all just go away as soon as they graduate, and I know. So anyways, I think that's not a good idea. So there's definitely is at least the possibility that it would disenfranchise both out-of-state college students and in-state college students. I don't think either of those are good policy, and probably unconstitutional and violate federal law. Finally, something that's less ambiguous, and I'm assuming it turns out to mean what the proponents apparently want it to mean, of course, which is a whole question there. It's a very, it would totally disenfranchise so-called UOCAVA voters. Secretary Scanlon's not here, but I do see Deputy Secretary Lovejoy, so she probably knows a lot more about it than I do, but those are U.S. citizens who reside overseas but are entitled to vote for federal office in the last place they lived before moving out of the United States. Usually they fill out a shortened version of the absentee ballot, because here in New Hampshire you can only vote for the federal offices. Some states do let you vote for the state offices, and I suppose a UOCAVA voter could theoretically fly back to New Hampshire and vote in their old hometown and then fly back to where they live. But so that's definitely, that's not even ambiguous in my mind. I've looked at the UOCAVA law and the guidelines, so that's a direct, this amendment, well, amendment can't be unconstitutional, but it can definitely conflict with federal law, and we would have like a pretty, we hate to be sued. We probably would be sued if this amendment became part of the Constitution. And so finally, my third objection is that it's an insult to the sponsors of the underlying version of CACR 15, who are trying to encourage young people to vote by allowing 17-year-olds to vote in the primary election if they will be 18 by the day of the general election. So I will close by quoting what one of CACR 15 sponsors, my friend and colleague, Representative Sherry Frost, said to me when I asked her about this amendment, and she specifically authorized me to quote her. She responded simply, quote, "Ugh." So this is definitely, so I believe probably the other sponsors originally will probably feel the same way. They might not have expressed themselves quite bluntly, but ugh. It's definitely not in line with the spirit of the original bill. And we do non-germane amendments that reverse the intent of the original bill all the time, and even germane amendments, but still, it's not a good legislative practice, and it should be avoided. And frankly, it's an insult to the members who worked hard to bring the original resolution forward. So with that, I think it's pretty clear that this bill should be ITL'd, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Horgan. Questions? Representative Sweeney.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative, for taking my question. The first part of your testimony and the crux of the previous speaker's testimony, in my opinion, was that this constitutional amendment is enshrining current practice and state statute into our state's constitution. We had record turnout in 2020 under your perception that you got to in the second half of your testimony, how many people do you think that were eligible to vote in 2020 under the state statutes that we're enshrining in our Constitution would now somehow not be eligible to vote in future elections?
My guess is if you share my interpretation of the language, it's 0, but obviously this has been introduced for some reason to correct some problem, and perhaps I'm guessing wrong what it is, so it's obvious. It depends on how it's construed and what sort of law is, probably some statute law would be passed in response to it. Of course, this doesn't kick in until 2024 anyways. I mean, if you do it really literally, in my opinion, domicile is the same thing as primary residence, and so this bill's this resolution is totally unnecessary, so there's no point, there's no point in rewording it in a way that's less clear. So,
Follow up, Madam Chair?
Thank you.
Follow up.
So for a succinct answer, 0 voters would be disenfranchised under this
Well,
constitutional.
don't hold me to it, but it would most likely be 0, but I don't want to take a chance on it. It could be, it could be thousands of them, depending on what else happens.
Representative Berry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Representative. You mentioned college students in your testimony.
Yes.
Where in the bill does it mention college students?
Well, it's unfortunately I can't refer to the debate in the other body, so that issue came up in the CASR 36 debate, but that's not an issue here. But that was about a resolution that's exactly the same, right down to every comma, every dot over every I, every cross over every T. So it's exactly identical to that resolution, which will be voted on in another legislative body tomorrow. And certainly with that one, I just know it's a controversial issue, and it did come up in another legislative body. And
All right,
that's,
thank you, Representative Horgan. Further questions?
May I follow up? Yes, ma'am.
One, Representative
So
Berry.
you mentioned, let's not talk about college students for a second. Let's talk about people who spend 9 out of the 12 months here in New Hampshire, effectively, by your admission, having primary residency in the state, which is a tacit admission about that there is some length of time you should live here before you vote here. But that aside, my question is if these people who are spending the majority of their time here and are voting here, and nobody's disputing, as you're not disputing and I'm not disputing, they have a right to vote here, shouldn't they be doing the other things that New Hampshire residents do, like getting a New Hampshire driver's license with your correct address on it, registering your car here in New Hampshire? Shouldn't residents of the state who are voting in New Hampshire elections be doing the things that every other resident does? And if they're not, what makes these people special to not have to do these things that other residents are doing?
Well, those two things you mentioned are very, very minor motor vehicle violations. They're not felonies, and this is a topic which actually was the subject of another piece of legislation in another committee just yesterday. But in terms of the driver's license, we're part of a compact with every other state, and we have reciprocal agreements with every other state and actually all the Canadian provinces that one jurisdiction's driver's license is as good as another for the purposes of proving, well, first of all, that you're a qualified driver and that you have and that your identification. So from that regard, basically, if you have a out-of-state driver's license, it's as good as an in-state driver's license. You just have the old address on it, and certainly, those are minor motor vehicle violations, and sometimes there are, especially with the cars, sometimes there's reasons why a student in particular, they're driving a car that's owned by another family member, and it's difficult to register it. But that's an extremely minor motor vehicle violation. It's not a felony. It's not something that would normally disqualify you to vote, and nobody would really care. Nobody really cares if a UNA student registers to vote with their, let's say if they move from to Durham from,
Thank
say,
you, Representative
Bedford.
Horgan.
Yeah.
Further questions?
As for the durational requirement, I'm happy with the current law. So.
All right. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Representative Horgan.
Oh, thank you.
And signed up as the final speaker, Liz Tentarelli.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak before you. I'm Liz Tentarelli. I'm president of the Nonpartisan League of Women Voters, and our job is to help people understand how they vote. I think most of the committee members know how they want to vote on this. I'm going to ask you to try to amend the amendment in one way only, and that is get rid of the phrase, "a citizen of New Hampshire." I don't have a passport from New Hampshire. I was not born here. I don't know how I'd prove that I am a citizen of New Hampshire. So I got very annoyed. Sorry, that's wrong. I was disturbed when I saw this amendment, and I guess I had too much time on my hands because I started Googling through the RSAs for citizen. And the only place I found citizen of New Hampshire was in some of the very, very old parts of the statutes that defined who may hold certain offices. So this probably is a phrase that was used back in the 1800s. It is not a phrase we use now. And if in my role with the League of Women Voters, I'm trying to explain to people who may vote, I can easily explain citizen of the United States. People understand that. You were either born here or you were naturalized citizen. I don't know how to explain citizen of New Hampshire. And unless we're going to start issuing passports, I can't explain it. So please consider eliminating that phrase, which has essentially no meaning for voting purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Representative Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Tentarelli. Does the term primary residence give you any pause?
It's a tough one to explain to people. We have used the word domiciled, and that too is confusing to many would-be voters. It's not a term we commonly use. So when I try in the simplest language possible to make voting accessible to the most people, I say you need to offer some evidence of where you live. And I leave it at that. And I realize that's not what the statutes say. But I have to work with people who need to understand things. So yeah, primary residence, domicile, those may be legal terms. They're not very helpful to the average person who now is eligible to vote.
Thank you.
Representative Barry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. And primary residency, domicile. What do you think is more confusing? Which one's more ambiguous, do you believe? Which one's better?
Where you live. I mean, that's a phrase that people understand, where you live, yeah. Thank you for this. Oh, I'm sorry.
Further questions? Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the proposed amendment here says that a person is a citizen of New Hampshire only if that person is domiciled in and has primary residence in the town, ward, unincorporated place. Isn't that the definition of citizen of New Hampshire that you would be looking for? Doesn't this define it quite clearly?
It's not a phrase that I've ever seen before. I've never been asked, are you a citizen of New Hampshire? And I would guess most of the people in this room have not been asked that question. You may have been asked, where do you live? But you're not asked if you're a citizen of New Hampshire. You are a citizen of the United States, I assume. If you're saying, what is your citizenship? You say United States, not New Hampshire. So I'm asking this committee to consider making this language something that makes sense to the vast majority of people who are eligible to vote, but need to know that they are eligible to vote.
Further questions? I will just point out that I think when they did this the second or third time, which got us into this mess, they thought they were being perfectly clear then too. So Any other questions for Liz Tentarelli?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You want to press the button, Liz, so the red is off? Thanks.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Representative Lane.
I find myself in the awkward position that we're not able to ask questions of you as the person who put forth this amendment. Is that a procedural?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So
Sorry, I just for purposes of conducting the hearing, it seems
No, I
like-
know, I understand.
Okay.
Representative Barry does that a lot.
Yeah, we constantly putting people down there.
Okay. So I would like to ask about these phrases that that disturb me and cause me, because I also looked at primary residence as a red flag, because it implies there is a secondary residence, and the term primary residence is not defined in 1260. Well, I don't even know the statute, but the bill 1264.
Right.
Not the one that we have before us now, but so. If we're going to do a constitutional amendment, I would like it to be more clear than this language.
Thank you for the question. Some of this had to do with what we just heard someone refer to as being what people are comfortable with and understand. And so in the hope that the adjective primary, the use of it as an adjective was going to clarify things, because we also have had discussions and case law referring to people who have multiple places where they lay their head. The attempt was to distinguish that. And I think it's pretty clear by virtue of the fact we've got some other bills in front of us who actually talk about nights of the year or something from a time standpoint. So that was the hope, but as we have public hearings, we always learn that things we think were clear are not. And the citizen language actually goes back to comments that have been received or discussed in regards to the origins of it to begin with, and that there has been historical use of the term citizen, and that it does have an historical meaning, and that maybe use of it in this generation after hearing comment is not appropriate, but that was the intent, was to tie it in.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I apologize to committee members for that, but I think we ask questions to each other. Yep. Representative Muirhead.
On the question of New Hampshire citizenship, it's something I do take seriously, though I think of it as symbolic rather than a legal thing. And I wondered if I could ask you whether you agree with me in that respect. For instance, I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire, and as a grown-up, I was compelled to live in Texas for a number of years in order to make a living. And although Texas is a great state, it's not as great as the state of New Hampshire. So when I lived there, I considered myself a citizen of Red Sox Nation and refused to root for the Rangers the whole while I was there. And I also considered myself a citizen of New Hampshire, even though I was residing in Texas. And I think that was a fair thing to do because it's a kind of state of mind and a symbolic status. And I wondered if you would agree that that category of citizenship of New Hampshire should be maintained that way as an allegiance and a state of mind and a symbolic thing rather than a legal thing.
I'm not sure I do agree. And that would be my answer. Representative Barry.
More of a statement than a comment, Madam Chairman. I just want to say I agree with Representative Muirhead. As a native Texan, I do agree that New Hampshire is much better.
Do I get to add in? I lived in Houston. I agree. Anything else from anybody?
Madam Chair, might I add that I have visited Texas and I still agree.
I just want to say I'm voting ITL on Texas.
Anybody else on the non-germane amendment public hearing? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. We are going to be in recess for 15 minutes, and then we will take up executive session at 25 of. All right, and if
I was never told who I was subbing for, so I just picked a line.
That is correct, Madam Chair. After a hiatus, yes.
All right, thank you, everybody. We are the House Election Law Committee. We are back from recess. We are starting our 11 o'clock executive session a little late. We have a number of bills on. Before I begin this, the next date of executive session will be March 9th. It will be only executive session, and it will be a long day for us for executive session. There are a number of bills, many of them having to do with election processes, because we have some communities with some items on the voting list for the 8th. So we're going to be here on the 9th, but if you've looked at your calendar, things need to be done. So that will be our next date back here. We've gone through substitutes. Our first bill on the list to be exec this afternoon is CACR 22, relating to elections, providing that all elections in New Hampshire shall be by ranked choice voting. I'm going to open up the discussion on that and include HB 1264 for comments from committee members. That is also a bill establishing ranked choice voting for state party primary elections and municipal elections. So they are both dealing with ranked choice voting. We've already had one bill that went to session and was voted on last week. But these two are also ranked choice voting. They are doing something slightly different. And at this time, before I take any, I'm trying to think, who's the real parliamentary? Can I open discussion without having a motion on the floor, Representative Bergeron?
I do not view myself as a parliamentarian, Madam Chair. I think as the chair, you can issue whatever procedures and rules you wish, and unless someone challenges you, we're going to abide by those.
All right, I'm taking a look at those open windows and deciding. All right. So before we have any motion, I am going to open the floor for committee members to discuss this. And Representative Bergeron has raised his hand in regards to it. So I'm going to consider this time open for discussion on both bills in regards to ranked choice voting. Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To kind of set the table, if I might, I am going to vote against the CACR 22. I don't think a constitutional amendment is needed at this time. I think it's unnecessary. I think that language could be written and submitted, and in fact has been, to create ranked choice voting situations in state law. And it's not necessary to tamper with the Constitution to direct that this shall occur. On House Bill 1264, however, that's primarily enabling legislation, and if the opportunity arises, I would like to submit an amendment to that, which would address some of the issues I had with House Bill 1264 initially, particularly dealing with the process by which the political parties and municipalities could choose to use ranked choice voting in their particular arenas, and also to ensure that there was a way to rescind that action at a future point in time if they decided, well, after all, ranked choice voting really wasn't working for us, and would like to go back to the way things used to be. So that's just in an effort to set the table for discussion, if I may.
Representative Barry.
Yes, I'm not going to speak at length about this, but to address, I disagree with the representative from Nashua was response about CACR 22. I think if you were to implement ranked choice voting, I do actually think you would need a constitutional amendment. The state constitution specifically outlines plurality for certain state races. Plurality is what it means, which is it's the person who has the most votes. It's not majority. Plurality is not majority. So I do disagree. I mean, we're going to vote the same way, but for different reasons. But I don't want to leave that on the table. That I actually think if you were to do this for all races, you would need a CACR.
Okay. Other comments? Representative Hamblick. Come on.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
For those of you who don't know, she didn't raise her hand, but I know that she feels very strongly about this bill. So.
I do. Thank you for recognizing me. I would be voting against CACR 22, but I am supporting
1264.
Whatever it is.
1264.
1264. I believe that ranked choice voting makes elections more representative of the will of the people than the first past the post system that we use now. It gives voters the freedom to vote their conscience. It discourages negative campaigning, and it helps to cure a divided society. And I think that's the main reason why we need ranked choice voting. Our country is divided. The partisanship has become hyper-partisan. The gridlock in Congress is causing them to not be able to get anything done. And there's a lot of public distrust and dissatisfaction of government. So ranked choice voting would not necessarily solve all the problems at once, but it's a step in the right direction. It incentivizes candidates to reach across the aisle and find common ground and attract support from more voters. They need to get over 50% of the vote in order to win. And the same as, so then if they're elected with over 50% of the vote, they have more support when they're in office, and they have more reason to reach across the aisle and try and work out agreements with other people. Ranked choice voting can help to cure a divided society, and I believe that that's the main reason why we need to move forward and allow this opportunity to enable the municipalities and the parties to try it out if they choose to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I disagree as far as it making negative campaigning less than what it is now. And the reason I say that, in a primary election, it's no secret that most candidates, if they're in a primary where it's contested, the best way to win that primary is to put forth a candidate who relates with party leaders in that whether it's a Democrat or Republican primary, and statistics bear that out, that the 4-4 and 3-4 voters are the most likely to go. So if you want to win that primary, you're going to really message to those folks. So on one hand, you're going to be very partisan, but then in the general election, under ranked choice voting, you're going to be extra neutral or in the middle of the road and tell everybody what they want to hear. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a better candidate. You're going to get a candidate that tells you what you want to hear more, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that candidate's going to be a better candidate. I mean, let's face it, look at the poll numbers on politicians. The average American doesn't trust what they say anyway. So I don't know that that's going to really achieve that. If it would, I would be in favor, but this time I'm going to vote against both of these.
Representative Bergeron, why don't you take us through the amendment? It's Amendment 0769.
Sure. This would amend Section 11 of House Bill 1264 which in the original bill is titled Applicability. This one, the new title is Applicability and Implementation. The major changes are, first of all, as far as the party goes, it makes it clear that it's up to the parties to decide what process they want to use to come to the decision that they want to use ranked choice voting, but then directs that the party chair or designee shall notify the Secretary of State of their choice to conduct ranked choice voting in their primary, just the primary election. And each party can act independently. Whatever one party chooses does not apply to the situation of another party. I would say that generally I've always supported any bill that lets the parties decide how they want to go about choosing the candidates for the general election. So this would be consistent with positions I've taken in the past on bills dealing with how the parties are going to choose their designees. I thought it was unclear in the original bill, which is addressed in the amendment in Section 3, how towns and cities needed to come to a conclusion that they wanted to try ranked choice voting. As I read the original bill, it almost sounded like the Board of Selectmen or a city council could take a vote and decide to implement ranked choice voting, but I wanted it to go to the voters so that the voters are actually making that decision themselves. So in Section 3, a question has to be put to the voters if whether or not they want to use ranked choice voting. And in the towns, that would, and most cities, that would just be by a warrant article, a referendum, an initiative petition, whatever process that community uses to put the question on the ballot. I did include an exception for cities that might need changes to their charters. Specifically, I'm thinking of the cities of Manchester and Nashua, which have primaries set up for some of their elections. In Manchester, it's when when more than two candidates are running for a single seat, they have to have a primary for that race. And in Nashua, there's a primary in place for the office of the mayor. The state constitution, I think it's Part 2nd, Article 39, says that no changes can be made to a municipal charter unless a question is put before the voters of the community and they vote to approve that change. So there is an exception here saying that if a charter amendment needs to be done to accomplish or institute ranked choice voting, then that will have to be done through the charter amendment process. And then later on, if the communities wanted to reverse the choice, they go through the same process. They put it to a vote of the voters. And I think that's pretty much what the amendment's trying to accomplish.
Further comments? Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, like I've gathered most in the room, will be voting against CACR 22. I'll also be voting against HB 1264. I did get a number of calls about it from both sides in support and opposed to ranked choice voting. And I have a number of issues with it. I could see the argument for state party primaries. I really could. I could see the argument for, even without legislation, internally how state parties organize themselves when they elect their state party leadership. I have great hesitation, and I would say the crux of my reason to not vote for 1264, either as the amended version or as originally proposed, the potential of jeopardizing our presidential primary, I think, is at severe risk due to this legislation. A couple of years back, there was a great project from New Hampshire Public Radio called Stranglehold, and they had a series of episodes talking about iconic New Hampshire primary moments. And one of those episodes centered on the magic of the New Hampshire presidential primary night, when regular Granite Staters and activists from the campaign stood on stage with a successful or winning or even third place finisher in the respective party's presidential primary. And that candidate got to declare victory in New Hampshire. And then the headlines the next morning across the country would say, Bill Clinton's the comeback kid from New Hampshire, or John McCain, the maverick, shocks the nation in Manchester. With ranked choice voting, that would delay the results from our presidential primary. We wouldn't have it the night of the election. Nobody would get beyond 50% unless they were the incumbent office holder. And so we would not have a scenario in which we would have in a multi-candidate presidential primary the results on the night of the election. We might have to wait up to a week. South Carolina and Nevada could be voting before we have the final results from the New Hampshire presidential primary. And to me, that is a risk in this legislation that I'm not willing to take at this time. I think this jeopardizes our position as first in the nation, because it would be we vote first, but then we get the results third or second. And that's not something that I would want to entertain. But I do want to specify it is a concept that I am not innately opposed to, and I did hear from people on both sides. I do know that supporters of this had been seeing this as a stepping stone to implement it fully down the road into general elections. And again, I'm not there yet, and I'm not sure if I ever will be. But I'm not making this decision lightly. This isn't a, oh, I don't like it, so I'm voting against it. I do want to say, and I think all the members here really thoroughly discussed this among themselves, thought it through in their conditions, and I wanted to spell out why I would be supporting a motion of inexpedient to legislate on 1264.
Representative Hamblett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranked choice voting would not necessarily take a week. We think we can have the results the same night. There's nothing that would prevent that from happening. In Utah, they have the results the same night. Or I would say at the very latest the next morning, but I think probably we can have the results the same night. Once, if in the first round of votes a candidate gets over 50%, that candidate's going to win. The nominate, it's going to win. If it has to, if nobody gets over 50% and it has to go into a second round, the local elections, local polls don't handle that. The results go directly to the Secretary of State, which then would put it into a high-speed tabulator, which would very quickly calculate the next round. And and the only thing that might take time is until we get our new voting machines, which we'll be getting anyway, the results would have to be couriered to the Secretary of State's office in a secure courier. I mean, it could all be done very securely. So it's not going to take a week. It can be done the same night or very quickly. That is not a problem. And otherwise, it doesn't change anything else about the presidential primary. Everything else is the same.
Oh, okay. Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have some serious concerns with ranked choice voting. I think what Representative Hamlet just mentioned with the courier. I think there's already problems, like there's perceived problems with how ballots are counted, and transporting microchips from Lancaster, New Hampshire down to Concord, first of all, won't happen that night. But if it did, it's transporting that to a secure central location for counting. And typically in the past, we would report unofficial results out of towns, and then the Secretary of State would certify it later. The other problem I have is that ranked choice voting doesn't always guarantee a majority. I think if you have a buy-in from 100% of the voters, it would guarantee a majority. But if you have a bunch of voters that go in and vote in the first round, and then only some voters vote in the second, third, fourth, fifth round, then it actually isn't a majority after the first round. So that's where I have an issue with that. So it just requires a lot of buy-in from the voters. I don't think the voters are necessarily there yet, so I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Representative Muirhead.
I just want to say on the presidential primary rules, I don't think the case that I think the national parties would have a lot to say about how the nominees would be selected, and they'd have a lot of influence. So I don't think this bill would be inviting our presidential primaries to be run by ranked choice voting.
Representative Hamblett.
Oh, if I have to turn off, anyway, I'm still turned on. Ranked choice voting does ensure support from the most voters, and I think that's what we want. We want a candidate that has support from the most voters. possibly, you know, the,
All right.
right?
Representative Barry.
So I'm glad the logistics of ranked choice voting were brought up, and Representative, by the way, thank you for your phone call, Representative. We had a long conversation, and you know my concerns are logistical. So I do want to push back on the notion that if we were doing a statewide race, that we would have results that night or the next day. It assumes a couple of things. The first of which is that every single town has a machine. They do not. So the Secretary of State's office will be counting hand ballots for ranked choice voting for, I think it's about a third of our towns, correct? It's not a third of the votes, but it's a third of the towns. That's not insignificant. I also brought up for the point of, we talk about the presidential primary, and I really have avoided trying to do the argument of presidential primary because I think there are very times it's legitimate. I think there are legitimate concerns here, but a lot of times it's not. But here I think there are some. But let's talk about the state primary for a second. Let's talk about 2016. 2016, the race for Republican governor had a four-way race. Then Executive Counselor Chris Sununu, State Senator Jeannie Forrester, then current Manchester Mayor Ted Gatsas, and State Representative Frank Edelblue. For those paying attention at home, Representative Edelblue got within, I believe it was 600 or 800 votes of Counselor Sununu at the time. And he was well within his right to request a recount. He ultimately chose not to. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that we used ranked choice voting and he got within 800 votes. Well, we wouldn't know until 2 or 3 days later because of the hand counting of votes, the bringing of the memory cards down to Concord or wherever serial location it would be. It would probably be Concord. And then he requests a recount. Well, now with our abbreviated primary window, we have a 6 to 7 week primary window. It's usually about 6 weeks. Now we're conducting a recount. It needs to be by hand, right? So now we're hand counting ranked choice vote ballots, and we've missed 3 days in an already extraordinarily abbreviated window. That doesn't work. It basically, you're just handing the election off to the other side. By the way, if it happened to my colleagues on the other side, we'd be saying, oh yeah, you should recount this and give up a week of campaigning, see what happens. When you're giving up 18% of your campaign window as the general election nominee, that's a problem. So my concerns with this are overwhelmingly logistical. I do not think, and the 1264, by their own admission, people who support it, they are trying to open the door to get it statewide. If you want to go statewide with ranked choice voting, there are so many things that you have to fix. You're gonna have to, if you want speedy results, you're gonna have to transmit results over the internet. We literally just voted against that. We literally just voted that down. So it is a logistical nightmare with the way we currently conduct our elections. You can make the argument on a town level. It's fine. The logistical argument goes away. But once again, the overarching goal of the sponsors is to get it to statewide, and you're just not there. So I'll be opposing it.
Representative Hamblett.
First of all, the Secretary of State does not hand count the votes. The Secretary of State uses their high-speed tabulator, so that's not going to be an issue. And it also currently takes days for the Secretary of State's office to certify the election. So, the immediate results can be achieved very quickly.
Representative Terozan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to refresh the committee's memory, when we heard testimony on the other ranked choice bill that we had earlier in a couple weeks ago, we heard testimony that in Maine, this was from the Assistant Secretary of State, that it takes a week to get the results. And we also heard that they do have to transport those ballots to a central location. In that, I agree with earlier testimony that that's problematic. The more you move ballots, the more chance you have of a risk of losing ballots or misplacing something, whether intentional or otherwise, that I think is a needless thing to have to do. If I want to remind everybody that we're in a time when a fairly big percentage of people in the state are concerned about voter integrity. So anything we can do to help get that confidence back is a good thing. Anything we do that potentially gives a perception that ballots are moving around and that things could be lost and things could get misplaced and so forth is not a good thing. So that's just another reason why I'm voting ITL.
Representative Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is only an enabling bill. Somebody would have to, just to try it out. We're never going to get comfortable with something new if we don't give people the opportunity to try it out. And whether or not, and some of the issues that have been raised may be legitimate, but we're not going to know if we don't try it. And I don't see how it impacts voter integrity. So I just feel like we should try something new, and it has worked in Australia for 40 years. It's worked all over this country in municipal elections all over. So I don't see what we're scared of, but anyway.
Representative Hamblett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, in Maine, it takes several days, a week, or whatever, to come up with their results because they allow a week. In New Hampshire, we have to have the results of the election in within I don't know if it's 24 or 48 hours, but it's very quick. We don't allow a week. So, and it can be done in a week, and it's done in other states. I mean, it can be done in a day, and it's done in other states. It's done in Utah in the same night. The votes are tabulated the same night. Also, as far as the voter integrity problem or issue, is that I believe that the voters that are worried about the voter integrity, I think what they really want to know is that their vote counted. And with ranked choice voting, every vote counts. The tabulations are completely transparent. They're published statewide to every voter to see how their votes, so every voter can see how their votes factored in. And, well, if you have had a chance to read Ellen Reed's results of our mock chocolate election that we had, she gave great graphic and great explanations of how the runoff rounds work, and it's just so clear. You can see exactly how it works. There's no question. There's no voter integrity problem here. So I think what the voter integrity people need to know is that their vote counted, and ranked choice voting ensures that that happens.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I would say that right now every vote does count. Now, if you're in a ranked choice environment, you may get to vote, say, for 6 different choices. But at the end of the day, you still could be, as a voter, end up with somebody that you didn't pick. So if your vote counts, but that you don't necessarily get the person that you want. And if you're making several choices, one could argue that you could say, geez, I got 6 choices and my vote still doesn't count because I didn't get the person I want. So I think that's somewhat misleading. As far as the voter integrity, the only reason I brought it up is because, again, in the state of Maine, maybe we can do it faster, I don't know, but they said that it took them that long. Not necessarily because, just because we don't have that long to do it doesn't mean we can get it done in an earlier period of time. I heard no testimony that suggested we could do it quicker. That's all. Thanks.
Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have been looking at this for many years. I was actually first introduced to the idea of ranked choice voting in 2010, of all places, at an ALEC convention in Washington, D.C. And there are a number of people there. It was not part of a presentation or anything, but it was a number of people with a small booth talking about it. And I was intrigued by it because in a number, especially in the presidential primary, number of times I wanted to vote for a candidate that I really was excited about, but I was concerned that if I voted for that candidate, that a less conservative, and I'm very conservative, and I was concerned that a less conservative candidate would win, and so I would not vote for the one I really wanted to. So I was intrigued by the process. I am concerned here in New Hampshire with our current system, our current machines, the amount of hand voting that's done, on how efficient the process would be. I agree with Representative Berry in that area that the process is, it's going to be difficult to overcome. However, that's part of the reason why I'm going to support 1264. This is enabling legislation. It allows us to test this on a in a smaller setting. With the Representative Bergeron's amendment, it gives a fairly detailed process for cities or towns to implement this if they choose to do it. The political parties can choose or not choose to do it. It gives us a chance to test it. If this does not work, if it's just too complex and there are too many problems, this legislature will look at it again and can vote and can say, we're going to end ranked choice voting. And so it seems to me that this is a process that has merit to test a concept. You know, we've heard often that states are the laboratories of democracy because we can test ideas before they go to the federal level. And in a sense, I feel the same way about this. I do have some concerns about the constitutionality of it, but I see that both ways. We are starting with the process as we are, and I don't see that our present wording in the Constitution requiring a plurality forbids going another step to bring it to either a higher plurality or a majority. So I am not going to vote for CACR 22. I agree with that it's certainly, I don't believe that's it. There's a place for that right now, but I am going to vote for HB 1264, and I do favor Representative Bergeron's amendment.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if this bill was just to have a test of the system without, involving an actual election, I probably could support it. But if I understand it's enabling legislation, but for municipalities or parties that decide to use it, it will be real if it's used. And that's another concern I have is the inconsistency. So you may have a situation in your town where your town decides they want to use this, but the party that you identify with doesn't use it. So when you go to, depending on what election you go into, you may not, it's just one more thing to confuse the voter. Gee, and then in this election I get to choose up to 5 people and the other one I don't. It just I think it muddies the water.
Further discussion? I'm just going to say a couple of things. One, I continue to have concerns about page 7 of the bill, paragraph 8, that refers to general elections, because it was my understanding this was intended to only apply to primary. And I think that was brought up, because I have notes on it, so I don't see anything taking that reference out. In regards to the references to Utah, Utah uses something called direct recording electronic voting, at least in some of its areas, which would be exactly what this committee voted not to do. And there was legislation to go back to all paper in Utah. I'm not sure what the status is, but certainly their history is that they have electronic vote recording, which I think given the size of this state and votes we just took, you can't equate the two. I don't think you can get away from the fact that there are logistical issues in doing this. Admittedly, under the proposal in 1264, at the discretion of who decides to do it. And while the municipality may bear that expense in regards to local elections, the state would certainly bear that expense in regards to primary. And I will echo what I think I've heard is that I think a lot of this is to my vote counts, is the fact people are not happy with the winner. That's the bottom line, what I think, and I think it started about 8 years ago. And I think that's what's going on with the my vote counted, because I think what you're saying is more people will have filled in an oval for someone who won, and that therefore somehow that makes them think their vote counted as compared to just filling in the oval for one. And I would suggest to you, when we just had a hearing on a bill that voters could not figure out appropriately how to fill out ovals for multiple candidates, that asking them to fill out ovals in a ranking order is something that maybe is not a road we should be going down. So those are sort of my comments. Representative Hamblett.
So, in all the recent ranked choice elections that have happened around the country, the exit polls have shown that the voters said it was easy to understand. And the man, Phil Steele from Maine, who testified at the hearing, he said, at the conceptual level, voters have zero difficulty understanding that ranked choice voting gives them the opportunity to express their preferences among candidates, i.e. candidate Smith is my first choice, candidate Jones is my second choice. Voters can figure that out. And the second point was that when given a properly designed ranked choice voting ballot and instructions, voters have very little difficulty understanding how to mark the ballot. So I don't think voters will be confused about that. Most voters get it.
Further discussion on the ranked choice voting bills? I'm not seeing any, so I think at this point it would be appropriate for a motion. The first bill would be CACR 22. Is there a motion, Representative Groen?
Madam Chair, I move CACR 22 ITL. I believe that.
Can I have a second?
I second the motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe this would enshrine in our Constitution something that is untested and needs a lot more thought before we'd even consider doing that. I do believe that it may be required moving forward, but it's certainly not for today.
Any other discussion on the motion? The motion on the floor is to ITL CACR 22. If I'm not seeing any further discussion on the motion, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald.
Yes. Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes. I'm trying to get the red. So yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clark is yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Page.
Yes.
Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
Yes.
Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Hamer.
Yes.
Representative Lane.
Yes.
Representative Freitas.
Yes.
Representative Hamblett.
Yes.
Representative Muirhead.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
20 to 0.
CACR 22 will go to the House session as recommended by this committee, inexpedient to legislate. Without objection, that will go on the consent calendar. All right, the next bill before us is 1264. There was an amendment presented today to the committee. Representative Bergeron, do you have a motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I move to amend House Bill 1264 with amendment number 2022-0769H.
Is there a second?
Second.
Representative Hamblett? Okay. Is there, would you like to speak to the motion, Representative Bergeron?
No, I don't think that's necessary. Thank you.
All right, is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call for the vote. This would be to amend 1264. The amendment number is 769. This is on the amendment.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Maureen, can you turn your mic off? Thanks.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
No.
Representative Mooney.
No.
Representative Terosian.
No.
Representative Berry.
No.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
No.
Clerk is yes.
I have no control.
Representative Alexander.
No.
Representative Page.
Yes.
Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
Yes.
Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Hamer.
Yes.
Representative Lane.
Yes.
Representative Freitas.
Yes.
Representative Hamblett.
Yes.
Representative Muirhead.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So we are 14 to 6.
The amendment carries 14 to 6, so 1264 is on the floor as amended. Is there a motion
Madam Chair.
on 1264?
Madam Chair.
Representative Lane, yep.
I have a motion
Yeah.
to pass with amendment.
Is there a second?
Representative
Representative Hamblett seconds
Yes,
it.
second. Thank you.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
Like Representative Bergeron, I don't think that's necessary. I would point out that, as Representative Groen pointed out, this is a way for us to test it, and it is only enabling legislation.
All right, any further discussion? I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. This will be 1264 OTPA.
Representative McDonald.
No.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
No.
Representative Sweeney.
No.
Representative Hayward. Sorry. This is an old paper. Representative Mooney.
No.
Representative Terosian.
No.
Representative Berry.
No.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
No.
Clerk is no. Representative Alexander.
No.
Representative Page.
Yes.
Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
Yes.
Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Hamer.
Yes.
Representative Lane.
Yes.
Representative Freitas. Yes. Representative Hamblett.
Yes.
Representative Muirhead.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
No.
So it's a 10-10, right?
The motion fails and is on the floor, open to further motion. Representative Terosian, do you have a motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion to find House Bill 1264 inexpedient to legislate.
Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded to be inexpedient to legislate. Would you like to speak to your motion,
Yes, thank-
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll try not to reiterate several things that were spoken of earlier. And while again, there's, I can see there's some interesting aspects of this idea, but at this time I can't support the idea for a number of the reasons you had heard and for a few others. One is that, and I mentioned this before in the last ranked choice voting bill that we had, that I am somebody that goes out and campaigns door to door very frequently. And one of the things I find, and I'm in a district with four reps, many people don't even know who their reps are, number one. Number two, they're lucky if they could identify one that is. So I think that it's less than scientific when you get into a ranked choice vote situation where now you have to vote for at least double the number of people. That's number one. Number two, one of the things we heard on this, one of the ideas, or one of the reasons that people like this, is that it helps a third-party candidate potentially get in when they can't otherwise. But we also heard testimony from the folks that came down from Maine that not one third-party candidate has won an election since they adopted ranked choice voting. And that leads me into a point that the Constitution currently is clear that you can win an election by the plurality of the vote. When Maine first adopted this, they had I can't remember, it was a rep or a Senate race where that individual won the first round by the plurality. Yet after they did several of these so-called runoffs, he lost the election. So that would be problematic in New Hampshire, where the Constitution says plurality. It does not say majority. So anytime you have a scheme that's going to require a majority, that's going to be a problem. And I won't reiterate, but I do believe that there is a problem time-wise with getting the count done election day. And while we heard testimony that many towns, or that we need to replace our vote counting machines, many towns have ones that are still functional and don't need to be replaced. I understand many do, but there are many that, if we adopt this, would have to replace their machines, even if they're not to the point of needing to be done. And the other thing, which I mentioned before, but I'll just touch on very briefly, is that, again, adding to the potential for confusion, you could very well, with this, because it's enabling legislation, have one election where you're voting where it's the way we do it now, and the other election, so the town election may be the way we do it now, the primary election may be ranked choice. So you're flipping back and forth, it's inconsistent. I think that's, generally speaking, not a good policy to have or set up a process that could lend itself to more confusion with the way we do things. And one last thing, and I'll shut up, is that I value our first in the nation presidential primary, and I do believe this would, if we adopt this, it could put that at jeopardy. And the very last thing is that I do believe if we adopt this, that it will lead to a gateway to have ranked choice voting in the general election as well. Thanks.
Any further discussion on the motion? This is on the floor as amended, 1264, and the motion on the floor is ITL. Representative Hamblett.
Yes, I would just like to respond to Representative Terosian's comments. There is nothing in 1264 that's against the New Hampshire Constitution. And also, I think the offices you're worried about are state general elections. This is only for municipal and party primaries.
Thank you.
Okay.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. The bill on the floor is 1264 as amended. The motion is ITL.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Groen.
No.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Representative Clark, yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Page.
No.
Representative Ward.
No.
Representative Bergeron.
No.
Representative Pimentel. No. Representative Hamer.
No.
Representative Lane.
No.
Representative Freitas. No. Representative Hamblett.
No.
Representative Muirhead.
No.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So we're 10 to 10.
Having had a vote 10 to 10 OTPA and a vote 10 to 10 ITL, this will go to the floor with amendment as with no recommendation. The next bill for executive session here this morning, this afternoon, is 1324, establishing a formula to allocate presidential electors to presidential nominees. Is there a motion? Representative Barry.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move that HB 1324 be inexpedient to legislate.
Is there a second?
Second that, Madam Chair.
It's been moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, Madam Chairman, very briefly. Ironically enough, this legislation would probably help my party, but ultimately, I believe New Hampshire is a swing state. I believe candidates should come here to campaign, and even if that means that my party is not winning all of the electoral votes, I think keeping them all together as an incentive so that New Hampshire's votes are heard in the presidential election is more important than securing 2 electoral college votes. So I will be voting inexpedient to legislate.
Is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor, which is to ITL 1324? Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will also be voting against House Bill 1324 and supporting the motion for inexpedient to legislate.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to have the clerk call the roll. The motion on the floor is 1324 ITL.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clerk is yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Page.
Yes.
Sorry. Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
Yes.
Representative Pimentel. Yes. Representative Hamer.
Yes.
Representative Freitas. Yes. Representative Hamblett.
Yes.
And I did something wrong. Representative Lane.
Yes.
Sorry. Representative Muirhead.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So 20 to 0.
The ITL on 1324 carries 20 to 0 without objection. That will go on the consent calendar. The next bill to be voted on this morning by the committee is House Bill 1242, relative to filing deadlines for candidates seeking election to charter commissions and relative to the date of such elections. Is there a motion? Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to find House Bill 1153 inexpedient to legislate.
How about 1242?
I would also move to find House Bill 1242 inexpedient to legislate. And I'll speak to that motion. I'm trying to move things along, Madam Chair.
All right, well, thank you. And is there a second? Representative Lane seconds it. Representative Bergeron, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, I will. The reason I asked the committee to find this inexpedient to legislate during our public hearing on the matter is that Senate Bill 423 addresses the same subject matter. It was sponsored. It was submitted at the request of the Manchester City Clerk, and it's the Manchester delegation that's behind Senate Bill 423. So this is redundant. Let's put it out of the way, and we'll deal with 423 in this subject matter when it comes back to us, if it comes back to us.
Thank you. Further discussion? The motion on the floor is ITL 1242. Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clerk is yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Page.
Yes.
Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
Yes.
Representative Pimentel.
Yes.
Representative Hamer.
Yes.
Representative Lane.
Yes.
Representative Freitas? Yes. Representative Hamblett?
Yes.
Representative Muirhead? Yes. Madam Chair?
Yes.
20 to 0.
The motion carries 20 to 0 without objection. That will go on the consent calendar. The next bill to be voted on this afternoon by committee is 1153. This is relative to absentee ballot requests. Is there a motion? Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion to find House Bill 1153 ought to pass.
Is there a second? Representative
Yes, I
Groen.
second this, Madam Chair.
Discussion on the motion, Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to vote. Oh, do you want to go first?
He never speaks up, so I went to him.
Well,
I'm very confused.
I would just like to note that I originally was opposed to this bill, but hearing public testimony on how there are absentee ballots being mailed to people that aren't registered to vote is really concerning to me. It's happening, so I think this will close a loophole and clarify this in state law. So I'm voting OT.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you. So, thank you, Representative, for covering one of the points that I had. We did hear in testimony that this is a practice that happens. So if we heard that from one person, I have no doubt it probably happens in other places. This is common sense legislation. And the fact of the matter is, I can't think of any good reason why to send an official absentee ballot to somebody that's not a registered voter in the state. And all this bill does is it closes that loophole and requires the individual that requests the absentee ballot to be a registered voter and prior to getting the ballot. Now, I know some will argue, well, you need to get registered to vote then, and that's true. You do, and you can. And let's see, we have a town election coming up in March, so that's plenty of time to go get registered. And the next state election won't be till September. So there's plenty of time for people to go out and do that. And if for some reason you missed before you pull an absentee ballot, you can still go down and do a same-day registration. This bill in no way prevents that. So I ask you to come with me and support the OTP motion on 1153. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to vote against the motion to ought to pass. And I do recall the discussion that some residents may obtain absentee ballots without being first registered to vote. But as was mentioned during testimony, this is specific situations where individuals are asking to register to vote absentee. Perhaps they're away at school. Maybe they've gone down to Florida for the winter, and they're requesting an absentee ballot at the same time. And as was explained during public testimony, what will then occur is both the application and the absentee ballot come back sealed in the absentee ballot envelope, and on election day at the polls, the moderator will open that. First, the voter registrar makes a decision as to whether or not to allow that person to be added to the checklist as a same-day election voter registration. And if they're added to the checklist, then the absentee ballot can be counted. Now, I know there was testimony that apparently this process wanted to be eliminated, but you have to consider the amount of time it takes for mail to go back and forth. I received a Christmas card this year that was mailed on December 20th that was delivered on January 20th, and that just came from Portland, Maine. And so my point is, if you're taking 3, 4, 5 weeks to get the voter registration application out and then have to wait another 3, 4, 5 weeks for the absentee ballot to be mailed out and returned, you're probably going to disenfranchise a number of people, and it's a very small number of people. I would also point out that regardless of what the intent was, if you look at the actual language in House Bill 1153, it doesn't do anything. It's just redundant. The actual current language says, upon receipt of a properly executed application for an absentee ballot, the town or city clerk shall ascertain if the applicant is on the checklist, and if so, send the ballot. And the new language says, under no circumstance shall a town or city clerk mail an absentee ballot unless the person has submitted an application. It's the same language that already appears in the statute. So in my opinion, it's redundant, it's unnecessary, and it doesn't even address the situation which some supporters of this bill seem to think it will.
Further discussion. Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. After hearing that testimony, I guess some people may have a second thought about voting by absentee ballot if it's taken 3 weeks for the mail to come. So you could use that argument either way. But no, I understand it doesn't create a lot of extra language, but it reinforces the idea that you should be a registered voter before you get an official absentee ballot. And I did consult with both the past Secretary of State and the current Secretary of State on this, and they both supported the idea and said that they, quite frankly, were surprised nobody else had done this earlier.
Representative Barry.
Yes, so I was actually originally going to vote against this bill. I didn't think it was necessary. And then the Town Clerks Association came and opened my eyes to how necessary it is. The fact that we are sending actual ballots to people who are not registered to vote, that is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. I asked the representative from the Town Clerks Association. He said, well, we don't just send them to just anyone. And I said, well, what if I call? What if I say, hey, it's a week before the election, and I call up from Derry, and I say, hey, I'm not registered to vote. Are you going to send me a ballot? He said, yes, that is just anyone. So I want to thank the sponsor. I didn't think this was necessary. It turns out, yes, we are, in fact, mailing actual ballots to people who are not registered to vote. That is cause for alarm. It leaves a gaping, wide open loophole that somebody could just request, they could do this 30 times, and then those ballots magically arrive on election day, and there's zero opportunity to verify this person actually is actually is a resident of the state. Don't want to go back to that. Has their primary residence in the state. How about that? There's no opportunity to verify that. It leaves a 6-lane highway open for abuse. We should not be sending actual ballots to people that are not registered to vote. That's what we're voting on. You're voting to stop sending actual ballots to people who are not registered to vote. That's ridiculous.
Further discussion. Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clerk is yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Page.
No.
Representative Ward.
No.
Representative Bergeron.
No.
Representative Pimentel.
No.
Representative Hamer.
No.
Representative Lane.
No.
Representative Freitas. No. Representative Hamblett.
No.
Representative Muirhead.
No.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Okay, 11 to 9.
The motion carries 11 to 9. It will be recommended OTP. That was House Bill 1153. The next bill before us for vote this afternoon is 1166, requiring certain voters to declare a party affiliation prior to the date of a state primary election. There was also an amendment that was presented to the committee during the public hearing. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair.
Representative Sweeney.
Madam Chair, I move we find House Bill 1166 an expedient to legislate.
Is there a second?
I second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Sweeney?
Yes, very briefly. I do want to just say I appreciate the scenario the sponsor is trying to prevent with this legislation. However, I think all too common for both sides of the aisle and for anyone organizing candidates for the ballot, you'll have a situation in which somebody that could regularly go to local committee meetings, be involved in their local either Republican or Democratic Party apparatus, and then they tell them in March, I'm going to run for state representative in this upcoming election, and then we get to June and its filing period is open or coming up, and then they're like, oh, I've actually been an unaffiliated voter this entire time and need to switch my party affiliation. Could be a true Republican, a true Democrat in the sense of ideology, and no disagreement there. but just had not taken the step to register at that party until right before filing for the election. Does not mean that they are not a full-throated supporter of that party. It just means that their paperwork was not filed. And putting in this provision to stretch out the time they would have to change their party affiliation before running for office would be a big burden on parties, on both parties that fill seats, sometimes in areas that aren't necessarily friendly to the parties. So that's why I would suggest everyone vote for this to be an expedient to legislate. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also will support the motion to find this an expedient to legislate. And I can verify what the previous speaker was saying regarding people's perception of how they might be registered to vote. In the city clerk's office in Nashville, for example, it was not at all uncommon for people to revert back to an undeclared status after voting in a primary and not realize when it comes close to the time for filing that they never declared themselves to be a Republican or a Democrat, even if maybe they voted that way for 30 or 40 years previously. I think the voters are entitled to some flexibility to stay unaffiliated if they want to, and then change to a declared party if they want to run for office at a later time. And I can verify that many times the chairs of city committees would be walking people into the clerk's office to verify that they're registered in that party so that they can run for office. And if it's done prior to the checklist closing, they will declare themselves a member of the party so that the party can fill the slate. So I don't think this is a good idea.
Any further discussion on the motion? The motion on the floor is to ITL 1166. Representative Terosian.
Just a quick point of clarification. Maybe I misheard something. I thought I heard the last speaker say that you'd have to declare what party you're affiliated with before you register to vote. You have to do that now. Did I miss something there?
No, if I could clarify it, you have to declare your party before you file for candidacy, file an office for candidacy. So if you're unaffiliated and you want to run as a Republican, you need to declare that you want to be a member of the Republican. So you're changing your voter registration form. You're changing it from unaffiliated status to Republican status so you can run as a Republican candidate for office. Okay.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Rowan.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clerk is yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
Yes.
Representative Page.
Yes.
Representative Ward.
Yes.
Representative Pimentel. Yes. Representative Hamer.
Yes.
Representative Lane.
Yes.
Representative Freitas. Yes. Representative Hamblett.
Yes.
Representative Muirhead. Yes. Madam Chair,
Yes.
20 to 0.
1166 will go to to session as recommended ITL. Vote was 20 to 0. Without objection, it will go on the consent calendar. The next bill before the committee this afternoon is 1326. This is relative to permissible campaign contributions by business organizations. Is there a motion? Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move HB 1326 in expedient to legislate.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Representative Terosian seconds it. Representative Alexander, would you like to speak to your motion?
Does Peter want to go first this time, or next time? Thank you, Madam Chair. This committee just passed sweeping campaign finance reform last year. Did a lot of good. It was signed into law just recently. I believe, campaign contributions is free speech, and with the dust just settling on the campaign finance bill passed last year, I think we should find this an expedient to legislate. Thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What this bill does, it creates a level playing field for businesses and labor unions as to how they contribute to either political organizations or political campaigns. Under the bill, the committee's expenditures and contributions must be made through a separate fund consisting of voluntary contributions from employees, officers, shareholders, or members of businesses or labor unions. The bill implements the solution recommended by Judge McAuliffe in his decision on a previous bill, in which he suggested that there was a broad restriction against all contributions, and he said that was too broad, and that what needed to be done was exactly what this bill does, is to make a level playing field for corporations and labor unions. And that is it. Thank you.
Further discussion on the bill. The motion on the floor is ITL 1326. Not seeing any further discussion, I'm going to call for the clerk to call the roll. Thank you. Sorry.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clerk is yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
No.
Representative Page.
No.
Representative Ward.
No.
Representative Pimentel. No. Representative Hamer.
No.
Representative Lane.
No.
Representative Freitas.
No.
Representative Hamblett.
No.
Representative Muirhead. No. Madam Chair.
Yes.
11 to 9.
The vote on 1326 is 11 to 9. It will be recommended to session as an expedient to legislate. The next bill before the committee for vote this afternoon is relative to the election day duties of incumbent election officials who also appear on the ballot. There was a motion presented during public hearing. Is there a motion on this? Representative Quayle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move that this bill be found inexpedient to legislate.
Is there a second?
I second the motion, Madam Chair.
Representative Terosian seconds it. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I would. Having read the bill and listened to the testimony at the public hearing, I believe this bill attempts to address the potential for conflict or appearance of conflict, which can be presented when certain election officials and also inspectors of election perform election day duties for elections in which they also appear on the ballot. It proposes to do so by disqualifying these particular officials from performing election duties in such an election. The bill would also prohibit such officials from remaining inside the guardrail during the counting of votes for the offices for which they are candidates. And furthermore, it proposes that the presence of such officials in the vicinity of the polling place would be confined to the areas designated for electioneering by the moderator. I have a lot of sympathy for the intent of this bill, but for me it presents a number of unresolved issues. First of all, I'm concerned about the constitutionality of the bill. The bill's proposal in Part 1 that in order to prevent conflict or perceived conflict, the moderator would be deprived of his or her constitutionally mandated authority and duty to govern elections and, quote, receive the votes of the inhabitants, unquote, as I'm sure we're all familiar, New Hampshire Constitution, Part 2, Article 32. In addition, the proposal to limit an official's presence to the designated electioneering spaces, this is in Part 3, for me raises significant First Amendment concerns. The law as currently constituted requires the moderator to provide a space designated for electioneering, but only excludes electioneering from the 10-foot wide non-electioneering corridor that provides access to the polling place for voters. So to apply a restriction like this only on certain specific individuals, these officials, seems to me to be an infringement on their First Amendment rights. Also, the bill proposes to impose these provisions on the moderator, selectmen and supervisors of the checklist. There are other election officials required and generally present in an election, and the rationale for not imposing these restrictions on these other election officials, such as the town clerk, the deputy moderator, and assistant moderator, and so forth. I don't see the rationale for limiting it only to the moderator, et cetera. And finally, during the public hearings, for me, well, practical concerns were raised by those giving testimony and also by some of our committee members, which to me, which I share. And these concerns regarded the availability of knowledgeable and willing substitutes for the moderator in particular, and that would apply to these other officials as well. With some experience as a selectman in municipal government, I do think that would be, it could in some towns be a practical impossibility to find someone to replace the moderator. The bill in excluding town clerks from their list of officials who can be disqualified, it seems to imply that town clerks could fill that position, but as we heard in the testimony, town clerks have a very different training that they undergo. And also, I couldn't find anywhere in the RSAs that empowered a town clerk to govern an election. So the question would become, who then shall govern the election if the moderator is excluded? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Quayle. Does anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the motion to find this bill inexpedient to legislate. I think the previous speaker did an eloquent job of summarizing all the reasons why the bill should not be passed. I would just note that while I thought the sponsor gave a very good reason why the bill was introduced, it sounded to me more like an electioneering issue and not an issue where you suddenly throw out all the election officials who were working in a polling place throughout the state because one person may have misused the authority that was given to him in his particular polling place. I would also note that this issue has been getting discussed now for almost 50 years, and every session someone comes along with an idea to tweak it and make it run a little better. I think the process that's in place right now is a pretty good one. It ensures that the people who are most experienced and who are elected by their voters to conduct the elections are allowed to perform those duties at the polling places, and so I will also be voting to find this bill inexpedient to legislate.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will be voting for the inexpedient to legislate motion, and primarily because of the constitutional aspect of, I didn't see any way around this. I thought there were many aspects of this bill that made sense, and but the fact that there's a constitutional requirement that the moderator conduct this, I didn't see a way to solve that. My hope, however, is that going forward, and I know it's been 50 years, maybe somebody will figure a way to solve this, because I can tell you I hear from constituents and others that when they see a town that has a town moderator, he may be running in the state rep election, doesn't really matter. They say, how come he gets to be inside when all the rest of the people have to be way out in that corral, you know, in some places it's practically a mile and a half away from where you come into the building, but I digress. So the reality is, it is a carve-out, it is inconsistent, and anytime we have something that's inconsistent, that always bothers me. You know, there's the old saying, laws for thee, but not for me. And so we did hear testimony that the electioneering laws are sufficient to, you know, make this inconsistency okay. But one could argue, and I have suggested that if we feel that strongly about our election laws being that being that strong, there's no reason to have to put people that are running when they're an active candidate on the ballot a long distance away from where the voter comes in. So we have a double standard here, and I hope in the future we find a way to solve that. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion. The motion is ITL HB 1359. Representative Lane.
Just because it doesn't happen very often, I concur with Representative Terosian and his view, and I think it's something that should be solved because I was shocked to see people who were on the ballot behind it when I went in to vote. And it is, I think, one of an election integrity issue. So, thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. The bill before us is 1359, and the motion is ITL.
Representative McDonald?
Yes.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien?
Yes.
Representative Sweeney?
Yes.
Representative Mooney?
Yes.
Representative Terosian?
Yes.
Representative Berry?
Yes.
Representative Groen?
Yes.
Representative Quayle?
Yes.
Clark is yes. Representative Alexander?
Yes.
Representative Bergeron?
Yes.
Representative Page?
Yes.
Representative Ward?
Yes.
Representative Hamer?
Yes.
Representative Pimentel?
Yes.
Representative Lane?
Yes.
Representative Freitas? Yes. Representative Hamblett?
Yes.
Representative Muirhead?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
20 to 0.
The motion carries 20 to 0 without objection. That will go on the consent calendar. The next and last bill for us to consider in executive session today is HB 1394. This is relative to the reporting of certain campaign contributions by limited liability companies. Is there a motion? Representative Sweeney.
Madam Chair, I move we find House Bill 1394 inexpedient to legislate. I would like to speak to my motion.
Is there a second? Yes, I second. Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be as brief as I can. This bill does have a number of issues that I think is important when we consider our votes today. The first part of the bill would require candidates or political committees or political advocacy organizations who donate funds to other candidates, political committees, or political advocacy organizations to report the amount, which they're already doing, but then also itemize the source of the funds that they are contributing to another organization, which we already do in a sense. We any candidate, political committee, political advocacy organization in New Hampshire that currently raises or spends, I believe it's $500, has to report their campaign finance expenditures and receipts to the state of New Hampshire to put on an additional requirement that when they are making direct contributions to other entities, that they trace back where the funds came from. In particular, it kind of highlights a misunderstanding of how campaigns and political organizations operate and organize their funds. There's no real tracking that takes part currently at that level, and this would require almost an obscene amount of tracking for campaigns and committees as is. There's also another part of this bill we had already dealt with in 2021 with legislation tying LLCs and the donations that LLCs make to the members of the LLCs. And when we discussed and debated that legislation at the time, there is no state database to the members of LLCs in New Hampshire, nor do we have good tracking of members of LLCs not from New Hampshire. So we really can't, there's nothing to compare it to say, oh, there's X amount of members in this LLC, and then to then take it and push it against individual members' contribution limits when it is funds from the LLC and not from the member, as is in state law, is just untenable with our current operations, and I think is an affront to free speech, which is why I would ask you all to vote inexpedient to legislate. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion. Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think sometimes when we're dealing with transparency and election laws and campaign receipts and expenditures, we have to try and create a balance between freedom of speech, if you will, the right to donate campaign funds to a campaign or to a candidate, along with issues of transparency and accountability. This bill would not deny someone the opportunity to make political contributions through the shell of an LLC or the organization of a LLC. But what it does require is that political contributions by a limited liability company be allocated to members of the LLC. That would thereby prevent the LLC from cloaking the identity of donors from in-state, out-of-state, even foreign money sources. State campaign finance statutes do not discuss, define, or even mention LLCs currently, and this bill is an attempt to close the loophole and improve transparency and accountability in our election laws, and therefore I will be voting against the motion to find this bill inexpedient to legislate.
Representative Groen.
Madam Chair, I work in construction and real estate and development, and LLCs are the preferred vehicle for investment in real estate properties. And sometimes a property we're developing right now will very likely have 6 or 8 investors. We do hope it'll be profitable for the investors, and we might make political contributions from that. If it was 6 or 8 investors and you spread out a $100 contribution or a $500 contribution, it would be manageable. I don't think it's right to be manageable, but many real estate LLCs will have 50 or 100 or 200 investors if it's a high-level development project. And if that LLC then makes, again, a $500 or even a $5,000 contribution and has 200 or 400 members that have invested in that LLC, it's a completely unsustainable way of doing that, of making sure that that goes out. And again, as has been testified, we don't keep track of who all the individuals are who invest in that. So I too will vote in favor of the ITL.
Further discussion. Representative Lane.
The Secretary of State could, when a LLC is formed, ask for the names and put it in the database, and it's a simple fix. They ask for the incorporators when a corporation is formed, and they are all listed. As with an LLC, they could ask that same question, and it will be in the database. So it's a problem that can be easily fixed.
Further discussion. Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a roll call on the motion, which is ITL HB 1394.
Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Fruitholm O'Brien.
Yes.
Representative Sweeney.
Yes.
Representative Mooney.
Yes.
Representative Terosian.
Yes.
Representative Berry.
Yes.
Representative Groen.
Yes.
Representative Quayle.
Yes.
Clerk is yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Bergeron.
No.
Representative Page.
No.
Representative Ward.
No.
Representative Pimentel.
No.
Representative Hamer.
No.
Representative Lane.
No.
Representative Freitas. No. Representative Hamblett.
No.
Representative Muirhead.
No.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
11 to 9.
1394 will be recommended as ITL. Vote is 11 to 9. That concludes our executive session today. I want to thank everybody for powering through lunch hour with me on this. Thank you very much for your attention and your statements on a lot of very important issues. Our next meeting will be March 9th. So enjoy the lovely day. What's the rest of it?